The Fantasmagorium show presents Guns, Martinis, Gadgets, and Guns. In the seventh outing by Roger Moore was getting to be old Roger Moore. Roger Moore knew that Roger Moore was being very Roger Moore, so Duran. Of course, I speak no ill of A View to a Kill. My name is Scotty, my opposite number Catherine is here, and Steve may drop in a blimp. What's going on?
Not much. Good week.
Yeah. It is a good week? Why is it a good week?
It is a good week because No Time to Die has finally come out on physical media.
Bingo. You do segues so well.
Yes, I have separate copies. I have... Ta-da.
Ooh.
Here. And real winner.
Oh, gorgeous.
Yes.
You know,
nice, glossy and shiny.
I'm surprised no Madeline Swan in that, though.
Yeah, it's the lower angle.
Yeah, no, fair enough. She could be ducking. So, and how did you find the video presentation? How did you find the physical media?
Excellent. You could tell even though they didn't format for the IMAX scenes, because IMAX actually owns the copyright to those. You could still tell the visual quality is better in the IMAX scenes because you could see it, and the brightness levels are awesome. The HDR really kicks in. Black levels are great. Better than the digital, I've heard, as far as compression rates go.
Well, don't start talking smack about the digital yet.
Well, it's very, very good for a home media release. Bonus features. I mean, they put the Being James Bond documentary on there, which is like the 45-50 minute thing on Apple TV Plus. That's good. And then about 36 minutes of like EPK featurettes. Which yeah, you could decent for by today's standards because you don't usually get bonus features anymore. Though I was hoping they would go all out a bit because this was the 25th movie and is Daniel's last one. And they've done a pretty good job on the bonus features in the first two films. The third one, admittedly, they had featurettes which they were not EPKs, they were a little bit better, and then the fourth one they totally wussed out on because of all the behind the scenes drama. And the audio commentary that the director recorded for this missing. So
you're still salty about that.
It's because it's interesting to get that, because the first 23 films all have commentaries. The 24th film doesn't, which is not surprising. So the fact that they even bothered because it's weird because it's like, why ask him to do that and then not use it? It's a little weird.
I don't know. Maybe he said something inflammatory.
Those are the best ones, though.
But alongside those physical medias, you did get digital copies.
I did.
Well, and I don't want to isolate this particular broadcast to any time of year, but 'tis this season. Do you want to do a giveaway?
Yeah, why not?
All right. Well, they're your copies, so it's your nickel. So here's the plan. There is a trivia question somewhere within Kat's recap of A View to a Kill. And when the scene comes up, I will be your pop-up video and I will say, okay, guys, we have a trivia question. And I don't know who's going to say it. We're probably just going to talk the trivia question until we actually surmise it. And then the first person in the chat, and I will be monitoring the chat, I promise to you, I am relatively sober. And first person in the chat to get the answer correctly, we will be in contact with you. I am on Twitter. I am easy to find. The Fantasmagorium show is on Twitter. Very easy to find. You can put it in the comments and be like, ahoy, me. I got the trivia question right in the comments in the YouTube video. We will find you and you will receive your digital copy of No Time to Die.
Be advised that this is an iTunes exclusive. It will not work with Movies Anywhere or any of the other standard places like Google Play or YouTube or Vudu or Prime or any of that. Only for iTunes, which is one of the reasons I'm giving it away, because I'm not into watching movies on iTunes. I'm not that into that. So, so I'll be giving that one away. So that just keep that in mind before participating in answering the questions.
Yeah, it's an iTunes exclusive. You have to have iTunes. So
yes. And as for the weekly box office report, as of Sunday, it's at 774 million.
We're not even going to get to 800, are we?
No,
Oh
unless
well.
the slight uptick over Christmas, but I don't think so.
Yeah. I don't know. There's so many things in the theaters right now to
Yes.
compete. So, oh well, that's not what we're here for. We are here for 1983. 5. Wow, same year as Back to the Future, eh? Huh.
Yeah, I think it came out the month before.
It probably opened to number 1.
Probably did well,
Mm-hmm.
despite the mixed to negative reception.
Well, yeah, and understandable. And I think that I surmised. In the introductions, I never want to talk crap about the movie or give my own opinion.
I will say that I first found out about this movie in the late 90s. A friend of the family gave us his VHS copy, and
The one with when Stacey Sutton and Roger Moore are on the Golden Gate Bridge. That's awesome. I love that poster.
Yeah, that's a great one. I remember because I'd been playing the GoldenEye 64 video game, and one of the bonus characters that you can get in multiplayer is Mayday, and it was fun to play guessing because the Google and the internet stuff didn't exist then, so it was fun to try and guess which movies these characters were from. Because I knew Oddjob because I'd already seen Goldfinger. I knew Jaws because I'd seen Moonraker. At that time, I had not yet seen Spy Who Loved Me, but I didn't really know where. And Baron Samedi, I knew from Live and Let Die, but I'm like, who's this Mayday person? And so it was fun to kind of play this guessing game. And this guy gave us a VHS, and we watched it. And as a little kid, I loved it because just eating it up as a little kid, you're just watching all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's a movie that we'll get into it.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Heavens. Oh, is that a guy? Sorry, no.
What's going on?
Oh no, there's stuff. Boom. I think I did something. Hey, and it's awesome that we were talking about GoldenEye there, because all I had to do was click a button, and I think I won. And blood fell down the screen. Sorry, troll in the chat. Anyway.
Yes.
I think. Otherwise, I'm sorry about Baron. There's stuff. I don't know. I have to find out. So what are your recollections of A View to a Kill?
My recollections is that when I first saw it, I liked it. I thought it was really slow, though. And I think I liked it just because it was a new Bond movie. You're always eating it up. But then as I revisit it, there's only a couple things in particular I like about it. It's the only Bond film whose Bond locations I've been to. Excluding the White House, which shows up every once in a while in a Bond movie. I've been there. But for San Francisco, because this one largely takes place in Northern California, the Bay Area, where I grew up a little bit. So that's about the closest I've come to being near a Bond film.
It's gorgeous when it comes to the cinematography of it. Now, this, and especially, I love it. Even in the closing credits, it's almost like Star Trek 4-ish as they're showing beauty shots from the Golden Gate Bridge. It's like they totally went there, and they totally, absolutely fetishized San Francisco. It was great.
Maybe.
Oh, no, you didn't? Okay. Sorry.
As somebody who's been there plenty of times and seen how gorgeous it is to look at up front just from the vistas, I did think it looked a bit flat on the screen, but I will get into that later.
Well, but then also that dovetails into how many John Glenn directed James Bond movies have there been at this point?
This, I believe, is his third. This is his third one.
But he's been
5 in the 80s.
Yes, but he's been a long time editor, second unit director.
And second unit director, kind of rising through the ranks. Back then, when Cubby was still around, they were very much in the family with these movies and promoting people up the chain. Kind of like, Peter Hunt was an editor on the films before he got promoted to direct on Her Majesty's.
Yes.
So that's kind of like where this goes. And, you have Derek Meddings and all those guys doing the miniatures and stuff like that. You have the same people coming back repeatedly. Pierre Lamont eventually passed it on to his son who got involved. So it's like, they're always keeping it in family oriented. So that's kind of neat.
It is kind of neat, and I appreciate it. But this is also the James Bond movie where, I don't know, unflappable gets annoying. There's never any stakes. There's never any danger, and they seem formulaic. I know I got really angry last week at oh my god, Octopussy, because it just seems like, okay, this is where all the tropes come from, this is where the cliches are, and this one just stacks on top of it, but I forgive it because Grace Jones is a strikingly beautiful woman. In fact, this movie is absolutely filled with beautiful women. It's got the guy from the Avengers, no, not the Marvel one, and it's got Christopher Walken. There's so much going on in this movie, and Roger Moore is there as your uncle.
He's the fourth guy from the Avengers to appear in these films.
Fourth person.
Yeah.
Who's the?
So there's him. There's
Pussy Galore, Tracy.
Tibbet, and the English girl from Majesties, Joanna Lumley.
Oh, Joanna Lumley. Yes. No, my mistake. Wow. So it's always nice to see an Avengers person pop up.
Yeah. It's neat. And there's other interesting cameos as well. Like you have Alison Doody in there as Jenny Flex.
Jenny Flex.
Very minor character, but of course we all mostly know her from The Last Crusade.
Yes. She kind of got Jennifer Grade though, because Alison Doody, she did end up getting a rhinoplasty.
I didn't.
And well, no, it's because she became unrecognizable as Alison Doody. When you see her like on the special features to the Indiana Jones box sets, it's like, that's Alison Doody. What happened? Rhinoplasty.
I also know that they were going to get Barbara Bach to come back for this movie for one scene. She turned him down.
Yes.
Probably because it's just one, whatever. We'll get to that scene when we get there. And they previously had courted, I think they got as far as casting David Bowie in the role of Zoran. And then he kind of changed his mind and gave this odd quote years later saying, I didn't want to be in a movie where my stunt guy is going to be falling off mountains all day for 6 months. I'm like, that doesn't happen at all in this movie with that character. And it's like most of it you could have done. So I'm not sure what he meant by that. And then maybe he didn't read the script. Then they also tried to get Sting after that, and Sting said no. So then
Sting was just rolling in that sweet, sweet Dune money.
Yeah, so I'm glad that they got Walken, and also they wanted Priscilla Presley for Stacey Sutton, but she had contract obligations with Dallas, and so that's how they landed Tanya Roberts, which I'm not sure how much of it is her or how much of it is the script in terms of the how annoying that character is. Well,
she is basically damsel in distress with a purpose. It's not like she's not damsel in distress because she actually has power and principles, and I liked her as a character this time around more than I have before. Yes, I know, because they put a woman in danger with an old man who had treated her like a niece. And it was like the dynamic of those two characters were absolutely help me, not we work together.
Yes.
Especially after so many strong Roger Moore Bond women. Like, as much as I dislike Octopussy is still, she has more agency. Everything that we're told about Stacey Sutton is sort of backstory, and this is why she's around.
Well, yeah,
not how she actually does anything. She's a geologist. She is Roger Moore's Christmas Jones.
Upon watching the film, she doesn't show up as a real character to well over halfway through.
True.
And then so there's that, and I know this is the film where 4 days into production on June 27th. 1984 is when the 007 stage burned to the ground because of leftover petrol cans from the use of Ridley Scott's Legend. Just caught fire and destroyed everything. And then they rebuilt it bigger and better, renamed it the Albert R. Cubby Broccoli stage, which opened, I believe it was New Year's Day or around there in 1985, just a couple weeks before they wrapped.
Well, heavens.
Mm-hmm.
So this movie not only destroyed the Roger Moore James Bonds, not destroyed, but ended the Roger Moore James Bonds, but it also ended the soundstage.
It did.
And both of them, again, rose bigger and better.
Yes, this film, it didn't end the stage. Ridley Scott did, or his people did, and then because they did manage to shoot some of the film in the new stage when it opened.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, which was the mine set, and they filmed a few other things on the other stages while they were there.
We'll talk about that when we get there.
Yeah.
Well, now that we've already skipped the things that we're going to talk about near the end of the movie, shall we start at the beginning?
Yes, and this film is the first of 2 films in the franchise to begin with a disclaimer. It seems unbelievably that before they came up with the name Zoran Industries and for a microchip company and all that they didn't realize there's an actual Zoran Industries, or was, in Silicon Valley that was involved with microchips, except it was Zoran with an A and not an I. And so they needed to put the disclaimer on there to avoid getting sued. Something similar, which they repeat inexplicably in the next movie on an even worse level.
Oh, I can't wait to see it because I don't recall that. Don't spoil it.
I won't spoil it. So
Thank you.
we have the gun barrel looking a little bit outdated here.
Yep. Bell bottoms, but still traditional soundtrack. You got the...
It looks almost like it's got a slightly brass color to it, which is a little odd. So Bond, it starts in Siberia. He's found the body of 004. I can't remember.
003.
He's found 003's body, and he pulled a microchip out of the pocket. And we don't know what the significance is yet, but he puts it in his pocket, and then he gets pursued by Soviet agents. And it starts as a ski chase. Bond eventually ditches his skis. Of course, he's not doing the actual skiing. We know that. And he ditches the skis for a snowmobile.
So many stunt doubles in this movie. Anyway.
Yeah, they did a terrible job. Like we talked about last week that it was okay when doing stunts like skydiving out of the plane in Moonraker or hanging onto the back of the plane in Octopussy. It's fine that you could tell it's not him because the stunts are just that amazing.
Yeah.
But in this movie, it's just really egregious.
Star Trek stuntman.
Yeah, so he falls on the skis and breaks him at one point. He steals this guy's snowmobile and moves along. That gets shot up, and he pries one of the ski treads off the snowmobile, and he starts using it to snowboard. And the thing is, snowboarding wasn't a thing back then. It was very new, a novelty type sport. It wasn't even considered really a sport at the time. It was something, again, that was very brand new. And for some reason, they chose to play a cover.
Well, and why would you not try and ingratiate something brand new with a song from approximately 15 years prior?
Exactly.
Oh, 20 years prior.
20 years prior. So maybe more. And so they play a cover version of California Girls by the Beach Boys. The singer was actually part of the
He was Gildea or something like that. Yes.
Adrian Baker of the Gildea Park. And he's actually done tours with the actual Beach Boys at various points in the 80s and the 90s. And the thing is that he's singing California Girls, but why isn't he singing Surfing USA? Because that checks off both the boxes. The fact that it looks like Bond is surfing on the snowboard, and the fact that the movie mostly involves and takes place in the United States. But instead,
they had already
Girls because most of it takes
they had
place.
already licensed California or Surfing USA to Teen Wolf.
Perhaps, but this whole segment of them singing that song while he's, snowboarding reminds me of the really cheesy Juicy Fruit commercial from the 80s. With all that's basically what it kind of reminds me of. It's like, okay, and that segment doesn't last very long. And at one point, so we get back to the main score. A helicopter shows up and starts trying to shoot at Bond. He ends up using like a flare to take the helicopter out by chucking it up inside the cab of the helicopter, and all this red smoke bomb goes off, and they can't see where they're going, and they crash into an iceberg. Which, why not just pull up? It's not like there's any other traffic or any other obstacles, but yeah, let's not pull up until this limited smoke bomb disperses. Let's just keep going down and crash into the mountainside. But okay, so eventually Bond ditches the snowboard, and he's looking around for an exit, and we see what I admit at first I mistook for an iceberg, but once the hatch lifts up, it's like, yeah, let's have this really bright Union Jack on there just as a big flag to just tell everybody where we are. Okay. So Bond takes off over there, and he jumps in, and they close the hatch, and there's this beautiful young woman, probably 24, 23.
Sure.
Yes. Or no, she was 21, I remember. She's 21, sitting at the controls, asking why took so long. He's like, oh, it's fine. They take off, and she puts it on autopilot, and then he kind of, pulls the seat up from her, so she collapses in his arms, and then they start making out, and it's like,
okay, no, it gets worse.
Okay.
Then he says, you better get some glasses from the overhead compartment because we have 5 days until we reach Alaska. And I was just thinking of like, that is a lot of counting wrinkles.
Oh, jeez. Yeah, he's
Can
57.
you?
He looks like he's maybe 73.
Well,
Uh,
no, I know, but it's like 80s old man. You know how old man in like the 70s
right,
and the 50s,
right. But
they
I
don't like if you like Paul Rudd
no,
today is
but
the same age that Wilfred Brimley was when Wilfred Brimley made Cocoon. There's a
right,
difference in terms of how you treated your body.
right. But what I mean is that I think he aged. It looks like he aged a hell of a lot more in the 2 years between Octopussy and View to a Kill, and just the way that he moves, the way that he looks, the wrinkles. You'll actually notice that he has since had like cosmetic surgery to remove the mole that's on his face.
I was gonna say no more.
Yeah, that's gone. It's like, okay, I guess he thought that would make him look younger. I don't know. But you're right.
No, you know what? I think it was just getting bigger.
So yes, 5 days with a 21-year-old girl, and he's going to use alcohol to apply. It's like, I don't believe it. It's just whatever. So then we cut to the most popular song, Bond song at the time, because it hit the #1 charts in the US, hit the #2 charts in the UK, not surpassed until Writings on the Wall of all songs, surprisingly, in the UK. But yeah, it's kind of weird. But it's Duran Duran's View to a Kill. And this one, instead of mostly using silhouettes, they do this neat, very 80s type thing where they have a bunch of girls with like this bright neon glow in the dark paint with like ribbons and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Right, like really hyper color. Song's
Neon.
great. Duran got the job because the bassist Johnny Taylor had run into Cubby Broccoli at a party, and he's like, "When are you gonna get somebody good to do one of your songs?" Which I'm like, "Oh, burn!"
What? We got Tom Jones
and Shirley Bassey.
Well, no, I know. Paul McCartney's hip. I was trying to find someone who an out of touch person would think is hip, and Tom Jones came to my head first.
Matt Monroe. Yeah, we can go on.
Matt Monroe is so unhip. My dad loves Matt Monroe.
I actually liked his song.
Right.
Nancy Sinatra. Anyway, we can go on. So anyway, the song's great, but it kind of ends.
What this show is. We just go on.
In the video, or in the main title sequence, the song sort of ends abruptly. It feels a bit jarring how it just kind of a bit stops, and we cut to London, and we see this, guard on a horse riding by. It's like, okay. And so Bond walks into Moneypenny's office, and she's really dressed up in a pink dress. She's got a pink sunbonnet, and she asks Bond where he's been. He's like, "Oh, I've been to Siberia. It's been a long time coming home." She's like, "Oh, you always, your dedication to the craft always impresses me, James." With it, M interrupts him on the intercom. It's like, "No time for small talk, Moneypenny. We're pressed for time." And she's like, throws up her hands, and so Bond is turning.
This is not the last time that we see Miss Moneypenny, but this
No,
is the last time. This is the last time we see her speak.
No, it is not. So I will get to that.
So okay.
So she goes into he starts going into M's office, and she's like, and he turns around. He's like, "What?" And he realizes he's still holding her sun hat, which he took from her, and he tosses it back, and she catches it. And she's like, like protective of it. And so Bond goes in the office, and Q has this really weird device, and he doesn't explain what it is. It's like a remote controlled like robot, and we won't see it again until the end of the movie. And he pulls out this, and they're like, "Okay, now that we're all here," and you notice that everybody in the room.
Pay attention, 007. We have the smaller version of the robot from Rocky IV.
And everybody in the room is sort of dressed to the nines. They're about ready to go somewhere. And Q and M's like, "Well, now we're all here. You can begin the briefing, Q." So Q pulls out this microchip, and he starts explaining the nature of silicone and microchips for whatever reason. And M cuts him off. It's like, "Yes, Q, we all know about
for the audience."
Yes. And so Q reveals that this special microchip from MI6, which is impervious to EMPs, is identical to the one that Bond pulled off of 003, which he retrieved from a research facility in Siberia, which means that there's been some kind of leak somewhere because it has a stamp from the Zoran Industries company on the microchip. And M mentions that because Zoran recently became, like, I guess was promoted to the top of the company or whatever, that's when the leak happened. Or when Zoran took over the contract, I should say. That's when the leak happened, and the defense secretary is like, "What, Max Zoran? That's ridiculous. He's a leading French industrialist." And so M's like, "Yes, that's why we're going to be very discreet about it. Don't worry." But I'm still very. But you can tell that M is smart because he's curious. That, no sooner that you get involved, that suddenly there's a leak, and the Soviets now have this wonderful technology. Because as Q points out, one of the other lasting effects from a nuclear attack, besides destruction, is just the EMP would just fry everything well beyond the blast radius. But if Russia is going to integrate microchips which are impervious to that, then that would give them an edge. So that's a problem. And then just sort of abruptly springs on Bond that, okay, we're going to go down to the racetrack, Ascot Raceway. and it's founded in 1711, and they're going to go over there. And he says, you have exactly 35 minutes to get dressed to go, Bond. And
Get dressed properly.
Right, and Bond kind of looks at his outfit like, wait, what's wrong with this? Like, he doesn't get it. And so then we cut to Ascot Raceway, and the defense secretary's there, M's there, Moneypenny is there to dress, and she's constantly shouting during the horse race. The horse, I think his name is Fluke or something. She's like, oh, come on, Fluke, get on, blah. She's cheering throughout and that kind of thing. And Bond is listening to this new character, Patrick Macnee, who plays Tibbet. And he's talking about
but that's his cover name. That's his cover name. It's like Godfrey St. John, Sir Godfrey St. John.
I guess I can't. Yeah, that's right. This is Sir Godfrey. And so he's talking about how they've been suspicious of Zoran because his horses tend to be inferior breeds, and they don't do very well in the races until the last lap. And he's like, I've never seen horses just take off like that in the last. It doesn't happen. And then he wins constantly. And he's like, he's already got a man in France assigned to investigate. And M is listening intently to this. Is kind of surprised. And then he and M turn around, and Bond's like, well, where's Zoran? And it's like, oh, he's up there. And we see Christopher Walken, and he's also dressed to the nines. He's got his top hat on, and Mayday's next to him dressed in this wonderful dress. I love the costumes that she wears throughout the movie. They did a very good job dressing her.
Strikingly beautiful woman.
Yes, and M is sort of rattling off a few details he knows about them, and he's like, oh, her, I'm not sure about her. The name's Mayday, and whatever. So the race begins, and Moneypenny's cheering for her horse to win, and instead Zoran's horse, Pegasus, wins in a suspicious manner, just like Sir Godfrey had alluded to. And once the race is over, Moneypenny's
just has a burst of energy at the very end, and just
the race is over. Moneypenny, everybody's upset, and Zoran and Mayday go down to the track. They accept the prize. He shakes hands, thank you, and all of a sudden Pegasus just starts freaking out. And Zoran actually has a look of like he's worried because like, oh shit, this could be bad. And Mayday goes over there and just immediately grabs the reins and reins the horse in, and she doesn't budge at all, despite that this horse is really rattling around. And M kind of makes a comment about it, about how
she must take her vitamins.
Yes, he's like, and Bond's like, and so does Pegasus probably. And then as he's turning to leave, he gives Moneypenny his ticket. It's like, oh, Moneypenny, can you cash my ticket for me? And she looks, she's like, Pegasus, because he bet on Zoran's horse instead of her horse.
And that is the last time Lois talks.
Yes, it's the last time she talks. So then we cut to France, where Bond is having a meeting at the Jules Verne restaurant at the top of the Eiffel Tower with Sir Godfrey's his detective or whatever who's been investigating this. Is sitting in the restaurant. They're talking, and he's like, yeah, that's kind of odd that what he does with his horses is that we figure that it's kind of a scam where he's somehow getting the horses, like drugging them or doing something to get them to win these races for the purposes of selling them later and making millions of dollars because of the obscene amount of money they spend on it. And he's like, and Azia will get to the bottom, attend to get to the bottom of it. And then he suddenly gets killed because Mayday has stuck into the rafters and used this butterfly poison-tipped grappling hook butterfly weapon that was being used by some other guy up in the rafters for the decoration for the singer on the stage. And she kind of fly casts it and hits this guy in the neck, kills him instantly. People scream, and Bond pulls out his gun and chases Mayday. And they go up the Eiffel Tower, and she's racing up the stairs. Bond's following and taking a few shots. He's missing each one. Eventually, she uses the flycaster again to like rope Bond to tangle him up. That buys her enough time to get to this clearly fake platform that was brought there by the production to do this stunt. The stunt, interestingly enough, had some problems because when they set this thing up, they were getting ready they're going to do a few jumps for this, and all of a sudden, some man and woman parachutist enthusiasts who are not affiliated with the production just used it to illegally parachute off the tower. And that nearly lost them their license for filming there because it's like, oh shit, if you don't have this thing secure and other random people are doing this, you get in trouble. But they talked him out of it, like, oh, don't worry, we'll do it. And they're like, okay. So then they get BJ Worth to go up there, and he does the stunt, and Cubby Broccoli was so impressed with how perfect it was. He's like, you know what? We don't need to do the other jumps, which were going to be done by two other guys on the team who were up there waiting in line because it's obviously a very long way to get back up there because you have to take the service stairs, not the elevator. But once they canceled it, the two parachutists were kind of upset that this was going to be the case. And so one of them in particular, John Calvelt, decided that the next morning he was going to sneak out there and do it himself, not realizing that the production had also showed up earlier for other shots. And when they were filming some B-roll in the stairwell, he suddenly flies down skydiving, like, oh shit, what's going on? And the timing apparently was 3 seconds from when you jump off before you have to pull the chute, and they knew it was 3 seconds because of the pitch of the wind in their ear as they're falling, which is really cool.
That's
and the
really
guy pulled the
cool.
chute, he landed, and then BJ had to fire him when he reached the ground, and the guy had worked in stunts like that since, because it's like, yeah, sorry, you can't, you're going to get us all fired. And I believe that was actually one of BJ Worth's last films as well, because he was actually involved with that company. So that was a bit upsetting, and nearly once again lost them their license, but they managed to work it out. So anyway, Mayday does this ridiculous swan dive, and you hear her go like, "Ugh," and it's clear that they like dubbed it on there later, and it's just kind of weird.
Well, how many times has someone doubled for Bond in this so far?
Oh, tons of times.
Yeah.
So she goes, lands in a boat that's been driven by Max Zorin, and he turns to her and he's like, so? And she simulates hitting herself with a flycaster and starts laughing maniacally. And, Bond gets down there as well and steals this taxi cab. And the taxi driver didn't want to give him the cab. He's like, I'm on my lunch break. And, Bond takes the car, throws the guy out, and starts driving. And the taxi driver starts chasing him down. He's like, oh, my car. It's so cheesy and bad. But
dude is drinking wine in the driver's seat.
Exactly.
It's very French.
I can't remember how Bond got down from the tower. That's right. He jumped on top of the elevator, I think, to get back down.
Yes.
That's right. So Bond's driving this guy's cab, and they have a few stunts of him, racing through the traffic and all that. And at one point, his car gets bisected. It's ripped in half. And
Yep.
You clearly see that it's a stunt guy driving the car at this point. They're not even trying to hide it.
Yep.
Which is a bit ridiculous. And so Bond eventually drives it up along the side over to this bridge, and he leaps off the bridge onto this boat where there's a wedding party going on. And he crashes through pretty easily and knocks over the wedding cake. And in a very comical 80s moment, you have the chef of all people getting out with his meat cleaver, getting angry and seizing him. And I'm like, oh, God. I feel generally that all of John Glenn's Bond films in the 80s very much feel like 80s movies more than other decades do for their respective decades. But it's moments like this that really highlights that for me, that level of type of cheese that, there's some moments like cheese moments in the Conner film, but not like this. This is just a little silly.
No, but I think that this is a thing that was built around the charm of Roger Moore. I think that people have a very romantic idea of the James Bond movies in the Roger Moore era. And unlike you and I, they haven't seen them recently. And when you assess them through the prism, I don't think that A View to a Kill feels like it obviously looks like an 80s movie, but I don't think it feels like an 80s movie, because aside from the title, they even sort of retroactively classic A View to a Kill as using it probably as the main score.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the highlights of the film that I'll get to talking about towards the end.
But I don't see that. I feel like this is it's not. John Glenn's movies are built around Roger Moore, not around James Bond. And I feel like when I say this is why it feels like a parody, is because John Glenn is doing an homage to what he's been told is the legacy of James Bond.
But I feel he continues the whole 80s thing with Dalton as well.
Well, we will talk about that.
We'll talk to that. So anyway, Bond is presumably picked up someplace. We don't see how he gets out of this little silly fiasco, but he does. He's in the car riding with M and Sir Godfrey, and he's talking about did you get any information from my agent before he died? And Bond's like, yes, he's positive that whatever's going on is happening at Zorn's stables, out of this French chateau that's 30 miles north of Paris, that took hundreds of years to build, apparently, by a duke who believed he would be reincarnated as a horse, which is why the stables are far more grandiose than the servants' quarters, which is true. So Godfrey's like, well, it is sort of last minute. Zorn's auctioning off his horses there this weekend. There's going to be a big reception, but I might be able to squeeze you in, Bond. It's like, okay, it's a little cheese. So Godfrey then takes on the cover name Tibbet, and he's posing as Bond's valet and his chauffeur and all that. And they're driving in the Bentley leading up to this chateau, and they pull into the roundabout, and Bond gets out, and he's greeted immediately. And by Allison Duty. She's like, "Welcome, I'm Jenny Flex." And behind her, you see these two guys dressed like they're from the 1700s, like the proper servant quarters for a chateau, are standing there, who are servants around you see a lot of them around this entire facility, this entire chateau, which is kind of neat. And so and she's like, "Oh, can I help you with your bags?" And Bond kind of cruelly is like, "Oh no, my man will get that." And he's like, "You got coming, Tibbet?" And in a funny bit, Tibbet opens the boot of the car, and he takes out what first is like clearly a big Louis Vuitton bag, and he just tosses it onto the ground, which you wouldn't do with a Louis Vuitton bag if you're supposed to be like a valet. But okay,
but I appreciated the frustration. I liked it.
And then
what was it? It's like
I love the back and forth between these characters.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like when Scotty and McCoy go to get the transparent aluminum, and then McCoy says to Scotty, "Don't get buried in the part." And it's like, yeah, but that's part of the cover, is that most of the guys who are surveilling Tibbet and St. Talbot or whatever, St. Smythe, my mistake. He like the thing that they're paying attention to the most is like, now the guy just seems like an asshole to his servants.
Yeah, because you see the next shot where they're going up the marble stairs. Beautiful, by the way. And you see Tibbet kind of struggling behind, panting, carrying all this luggage, this ridiculous amount of bags, with an umbrella even. And when
Stop wheezing, Tibbet.
Yeah, stop wheezing, Tibbet. And Jenny shows him into the room. Stop wheezing. Hurry up and help me unpack. Yes, sir. Oh, get this on down. Oh, sorry, sir. And he opens up his suitcase. Like, "Oh, Tibbet, don't you know how to pack?" It's like, "Oh, yes, sorry, sir." And as he's saying this, Tibbet is using what looks like an automatic shaving razor, which is actually scoping the room for bugs. And he finds it on top of one of the lamps. And then Bond gets out this little tape recorder and he sets it down, and it continues their conversation. And then they step outside onto the balcony, and Godfrey's like, "Do we really have to keep this up when we're alone?" And Bond's like, "I kind of do." And then there's a brief joke where it cuts to the security offices where Scarpine, Zorn's right-hand man, is. And he's checking on the security officer, and he's like, "What's going on in St. Smythe's room?" And he's like, "Oh, not much, but man, it really sucks to be his valet." And he snoops in on it. It's pretty funny. And Scarpine kind of has a laugh because that's going to be funny. So then they're standing here, they're watching, and they see a helicopter land, Bond and Tibbet. And out of the helicopter comes Stacey Sutton, and Zorn goes to greet her. He kisses her hand, he lures away. They see the Dr. Carl Mortner on the bridge, and Tibbet says that he had seen him near the stables. And that's right, I forgot to mention, when they did arrive, Tibbet did kind of go sneaking around the stables, and he did see that Pegasus
just vanishes.
Yeah, he takes him into the stable, and then like a minute later, they're literally gone, and he has no idea where they went. And it's like, "Oh, that's interesting." And Jenny's like, "Oh, come to the reception at 6.
Also, when Stacey Sutton,
that's right.
No, just wait a second. When Stacey Sutton gets out of the helicopter, do you hear "Cherry Pie" by Warrant, or is it just me?
I don't recall.
Okay, you're supposed to say it's just me.
Right. So they dropped off the luggage, and or before that, that's right. Before they dropped off the luggage, they went to park the car over by the stables, and that's when Tibbet followed Pegasus and Dr. Mortner to the side stables where Pegasus just disappeared with Dr. Mortner in the shed. While Bond, meanwhile, was checking out the auction. And it's true that these stables are absolutely gorgeous and were built by the Duke who believed you'd be reincarnated as a horse. And Bond takes an interest. That's where Bond met Scarpine and took an interest in Pegasus. He's like, "Oh, where's that horse?" He's like, "Oh, that's the best one. It's not going to be auctioned off till later in the day. Expect it to go for high as $3 million." And Scarpine made sure to mention this to Zorin, that, "Oh, this guy's here and he's automatically interested in this," which I've never been to an auction. I'm not familiar with this world, so I'm not sure why he would feel the need to tell Zorin that, but okay. So and then it was after that when they went back to the main chateau, and Jenny Flex showed him to the room. They swiped for bug, all that kind of thing. And Bond decides that, having seen Stacey Sutton greeted by Zorin, that this means something. He's like, "Oh, I better go get some information from her." And Godfrey's like, "Oh, you don't really have to do this, sir." And Bond's like, "Oh, Tibbet, when I'm on the job, I'm expected to sacrifice myself."
As recently as 2 movies ago, he was saying, "No, I can't touch BB. She's too young." And now he's like,
"That's right, because BB, she was 21.
Even my Sharona."
Yeah, but then in the pre-title sequence, of course, you'll romance the 21-year-old in the
for 5 days.
Yeah. So anyway, Bond goes to the reception and he puts on these ridiculous glasses which have this X-ray vision, and he spies on Zorin's office where he sees, he sees Stacey Sutton with Zorin, and he cuts her a check for $5 million. And he's kind of surprised by this. And Stacy seems to be being cordial. We can't hear what's going on, but he shows her back out, and he goes to the reception. And then Bond is tapped on the shoulder kind of by Scarpine, who asks him, "Oh, you enjoying?" Oh, and Bond's like, "Oh, yes, I'm enjoying the refreshments." So he goes to check out the people at the reception, and specifically he introduces himself to Dr. Mortner. And he says, "Oh, Dr. Mortner, are you a doctor of human medicines? I hear you're about the breeder of Zorn's horses." He's like, yeah, it's all about horses, and I could dabble in the human breeding as well." And Bond says, "Well, answer me this. Share me this secret. How is it that you're able to breed less successful, inferior bloodlines?" He's like, "Oh, it's about selective breeding and blah, blah, blah." And then he's like, "Oh, but may I introduce you to, Bob Conley?" And Bob Conley is a Texan, and he sounds a bit like a cartoon character. And Bond asks, "Where are you operating out of, Texas?" And he's like, "Nah, Frisco," which is funny because there is a place called Frisco, Texas, where you'd probably find a lot of oil rigs. But he's referring to San Francisco.
Right.
And he's like, "Oh," and Bond's like, "Well, do you ride horses? Are you here for the auction?" He's like, "I can't even ride. I'm in the oil business." And it's like, okay. And then it still begs the question, why are you here? But he's like, and then he says, "Oh, excuse me." And he wants to show his wife something, and they leave. And Bond talks to Mortner, and then Zorn suddenly comes up and introduces himself. He's like, St. John Smythe, good to meet you. I hear you're interested in Pegasus." And Bond says, "Oh, yes, I like riding. I just inherited it from my aunt and distant relative, and now I just thought I'd use the stables and race horses and all this stuff. But hobbies, oh yeah, I kind of enjoy fly casting." And he mimes that, and Zorn obviously immediately knows, okay, this guy's on to me. And he's like, "Oh, I'm neglecting my other guests. Enjoy yourself. I'm sure you'll find plenty of women who would be happy to have your company." And so, sure enough, Bond takes off, and the first woman he spots is Stacy on this little.
No, he's had a bead on Stacy for a while. He steals champagne 2 glasses and goes directly over and says, "Hello, I'm your uncle."
Yeah, might as well. And so he talks to her, and he's trying to get information from her. He's like, "What, are you here for buying or selling?" She's like, "Excuse me?" And he's like, "Horses." And she's like, "Oh, no, I was here for some." But before she could really get anywhere, before
It's
Bond...
not a double entendre if you're creepy.
Exactly. So Zoran spots this, and he tells Mayday, he's like, "Mayday, get her away from him."
Yeah,
so Mayday
that's what I said when I was watching the scene.
Yes, and so Mayday, once again, a wonderful dress that she's wearing. I love it. Like this burgundy red wraparound. So she goes down and steps in, and Bond's like, "Oh," and she's like, "Your helicopter will be leaving in 20 minutes. And Bond's like, "Oh, maybe I could escort you down there." And maybe he's like, "No." He's like, "Oh, I was hoping I wouldn't be alone for the night." And she's like, "Oh, I doubt that. You'll find somebody else." And
yeah.
So they walk Stacy away, and she leaves. And that night, Bond and or it cuts to Tibbet first, or Sir Godfrey, I should say.
Yes.
And he's into the stable where Pegasus was. And he's looking around, and they seemingly repeat the joke from Moonraker, where Bond is where he gets like "aha" with his hand, and they do this where Bond is sneaking around the stable.
I tell you, it's John Glenn. It's John Glenn loves these fucking jump scares.
Well, no, because he didn't direct Moonraker.
No, I know, but he carried them on. The thing is, we're building this up around the Church of Roger Moore.
So he comes around. So Tibbet's looking in the stable, and we see this hand, and there's a music cue with somebody sneaking up behind him. And then it's Bond, and grabs Tibbet by the mouth and covers it. And Tibbet's like, "Oh!" And I'm thinking, I get that Tibbet is staying in the servants' quarters, which are separate from where Bond is, but they had to have agreed to, meet here at a particular time. So why he's sneaking up on him in the dark? Yeah, it's a ridiculous jump scare. And rather unbelievably, Tibbet was not able to find the simple switch, the little button that was like literally right there staring you in the face, which lowers the stable, and it's like a big elevator, and it goes to the secret laboratory where Bond and Tibbet discover that Zorn's been injecting his horses with these microchips as a way to use electrical stimulation to really cause him to kick up. That's how he's winning the races. He's cheating.
Oh, it's full of horse steroid.
Yes, horse steroids, and they're like, okay, that's how he's winning. So we're continuing the tradition of Bond films where the Bond villain, who is obscenely rich already, decides to be extremely petty at cheating at things which are well beneath him.
Well, we'll get to what's going on.
Right. So they look around, and but they hear somebody coming. We see these 2 thugs enter, and Bond's like, "Oh shit, Tibbet, get the lights!" And he mistakenly puts the vial of steroids back in the wrong slot. Once again, Bond not paying attention where he's putting things. So they run out this back door, and they find themselves in this lower factory, and where there's tons of boxes and crates of Zorn microchips. And Bond's like, there's a surplus of microchips in the world, but Zoran's hoarding them, which basically tells us right off the bat, aha, this is the Goldfinger plot. It's like, okay, even though we don't know the method of execution for the plot yet. And so Tibbet's kind of looking around, and then the two guys show up, and one of them is like this really big, muscular guy, looks like he's out of some 40s noir film, and the other's kind of like another, oh, yeah, type of guy. Skinny, and they get in a fight, and I've heard it proposed by some fans that the reason they may have cast Patrick McNee in this role is because they wanted somebody who looked considerably worse than Bond. They wanted to make Bond feel younger and stronger in these fight scenes because Tibbet is just terrible, and he just gets thrown into the boxes immediately, and Bond punches out the big thug and throws him on the conveyor belt, and moves along down the line and straps him into the crate, and Tibbet's like, oh, I'm sorry, it wasn't very much help. And Bond's like, oh, that's okay. And if that's true that they cast him for that, that'd be really sad. But I do actually like their banter. I think they are really. If this were like a Roger Moore comedy that wasn't James Bond related, I think it would have been a great like story just for those two. It doesn't need to be a Bond movie. They don't necessarily. This relationship doesn't really fit in terms of a Bond movie. But
in terms, see, it's interesting that you bring it up at this point of the recap, because I think that at this point in the movie when I'm watching it, I was like, this is the most middle-aged man movie I have ever seen, and I've seen The Great Escape. Like this.
You mean middle-aged in terms of the appeal?
Yes.
Yeah, because certainly they're older than that.
Of course. But at this point, like we are talking about a transition in terms of where the fan base is. Like I grew up on Moonraker and this movie, and it really wasn't until GoldenEye became a viable action franchise again. It didn't rise to the same level as, say, your Goldfingers, your Only Live Twices. My opinion, we'll get there when we get there. But this movie, we start off with Bond getting a woman who is much younger for him. We meet up with his authority figures who are much older than him. His office crush is age appropriate, but we wouldn't know. So then we are introduced to a world of foxes that Bond is led into. And now we have also a middle-aged sidekick. Like it's almost like watching A View to a Kill. Please continue.
Yeah, so we cut after Bond and Tibbet take this guy out. We cut to Zoran and Mayday, and they're in a dojo, and she's teaching him how to fight, and they're having a go at it, and then it cuts away to this larger factory. And we realize that it's not just this small storage room where all these microchips are. There's a huge subterranean factory down here that's like really, big warehouse type thing. And Bond and Tibbet are in there, and they get spotted by security, and the alarm gets set off. And the alarms are going off, and Scarpine calls Zoran at the dojo, and Zoran's really upset, and he picks up the phone, or he goes to pick up the phone, and Mayday rolls over. She's really upset because, first of all, Zoran pinned her and won the fight, which is okay. I'll get to why that's very science fiction-y by the end of the film. And so, I'll get to that. And so he pins.
But this is clearly foreplay. These people are clearly lovers.
Yes, they are. And he pins her down, and she's really upset and animal. It's like, kind of thing. And he possibly kisses her, and that's when the phone rings, and he rolls over to go answer it. She's like all agitated and upset. And he picks up the phone.
Yeah, because she wanted to get her freak on, and she couldn't. Grace Jones needs some bone.
He picks up the phone. He's like, I told you not to disturb us. And like, well, there's been a break in security, and Mr. Smythe is not in his room. And he's like, oh, okay. So, because he had known from the fact that Smythe was talking to Stacy that there's something else going on here.
No, he was like, we've better get back to our rooms. The tape has nearly run out. Because they've been playing a tape with the snort.
Because it ran out 5 minutes ago.
Yes.
And so Bond and Tibbet separate, and Tibbet presumably makes it back to the servants' quarters just fine. Bond, he doesn't get back at first because the gate closes to get into the main building. And so then he has to turn around, and there's a drawbridge, of course, because this is an old chateau, and Bond runs as fast as he can and leaps onto it, grabs on and pulls himself over.
Our 12th stunt double.
Yes, he gets back in, and Mayday, Zoran, and Scarpine burst into St. John Smythe's room, and they don't see him in there. And in a very contrived moment, Mayday all of a sudden, who's been thinking he's very familiar for a while, she recognizes Smythe but can't place him. She's like, he was the man at the Eiffel Tower. And Zoran's like, we must find him. And so they're taking off, and they're about to begin this thing. And apparently Bond knew where Mayday's room was because she opens the door, and Bond's there, and he's like, "Oh, Mayday, you're here. I've been waiting for you to take care of me personally." She teased him with that line earlier, and Zoran hears this, and he's standing there, and Mayday kind of looks at Zoran, and she's kind of tapping her face, like, wondering, and then she goes inside and closes the door, and Zoran's just like, like, kind of like, really, you reject it? It's like, okay, and so Mayday and Bond kind of.
Well, if you're concerned about a dude, and you need your head of security to know where he is at all time.
Yes. So,
kind of makes sense if you're, psychopathic. We'll get to who he is and what he is later.
So, I mean, that he's kind of has the reaction that we, the audience, do at the prospect that she's going in the bedroom to sleep with Bond. He's like, really? And Zoran's kind of like, okay. And in the room, Mayday takes off all her clothes, and she gets into bed, and Bond says, and she's like, oh, what's there to say? And they start making love. And I found out this is the scene that is the reason why Roger Moore does not like Grace Jones and would never say anything about her ever in any of his books about her. Yes, if you read the Bond on Bond book or other books, when he's talking about all the leading ladies that he's acted with, he says, oh, when it comes to Grace, Grace Jones was in there too. Well, if I have nothing really nice I can think of to say, I'm probably best not to say anything about her. It turns out that in this scene, because Grace Jones and virtually everybody else in the production recognized just how cringy and ridiculous this idea is that she's going to be sleeping with him, she decided to lighten the tension by sneaking a dildo under the covers and Bond, and he did not think that was funny at all. The rest of the crew thought it was hilarious, and he apparently did not have a sense of humor about it, and that's why he just kind of gave her the cold shoulder for the rest of time.
I believe the British call it buggery.
Yes, he did not find that funny, which is ironic.
I think it's hilarious. I'm on Grace Jones' side.
Yes, because it's a parrot, but that's why. Meanwhile, Zoran goes to the secret lab under the horse track.
Also, wait, before we move on, Mayday is an authoritative lover, and I admire that, even though she's evil.
Yes, she is, which is probably why, which is reflected in the fact that she was very upset that Zoran pinned her to the ground of the floor of the dojo.
Well, I thought she was pissed that she didn't get to make with the love after that.
Well, that too. So meanwhile, we cut to the basement, the secret lab at the horse stable, and Zoran asks Dr. Mortner if anything's out of place. Did they take anything? And he's like, Norton's like, no, they didn't take anything. Oh, but this vial, it's in the wrong place. And so now he knows the jig is up. And Zoran tells Scarpine to have St. John Smythe come and see him the first thing in the morning. He's like, oh, okay. So then
I love this scene.
This is a ridiculous scene. So the next morning, Bond shows up in there. He greets Zoran. He's like, how'd you sleep? Oh, well. He sits down and talks, and they're talking about horses. And Zoran, this is like you said, the back in the 80s, people thought computers could do anything and everything. And so he basically uses a camera in there to take a picture of Bond, and the computer just magically figures out exactly who he is, who he's working for. There's James Bond, 007, MI6, Secret Service, all this crap from just taking a picture of him. It's like, okay. And Zoran decides that, I'll make you...
Also, why is the computer making dramatic pauses?
I don't know. And
James Bond, ...
And they're talking, and he's like, you know what? And the way Zoran's reacting to each of the pauses when he sees that License to Kill, he's like, ooh, like, ooh, this guy's somebody. And he's like, how about we go for a morning ride? And and once he sees the License to Kill, it's like, oh, I think I have just the horse for you. So we cut to the horse track, not Ascot, because we're in France still. And it's like a more of a field track. There's like a lot of like trees separating it and everything, and bushes. And Zoran makes Bond a deal.
It's a complete remake of the scene from Moonraker.
Yes, and he tells Bond, and it looks the same in terms of the landscaping and everything. Yes, and so he makes Bond, I will make you a deal, or not Bond. He still calls him St. John Smythe. He's like, if you win this race, if you win the race, you win the horse. If you last the whole course. Not even win. He says, if you can last the whole course, you can keep the horse, which is great. Yeah. And Bond's like, okay, cool. So they start this big horse race, and it has little gags where Zoran will, his horse will jump over the bars, and then Zoran turns around and signals to a goon who's hiding behind to press a button to raise it even higher, which not only potentially sabotages Bond, but it sabotages Zoran's own henchmen. And it's like, wait a minute. Zoran's henchmen at various points are trying to attack Bond and hit him with the riding chops to get him to fall off the horse. And yet those same henchmen who must know about these little gags and traps are riding ahead of Bond and falling victim to them before he does, knocking the poles out of the way so Bond can continue jumping, making it through the course. Which is so
They're
weird.
Murder boys, not equestrians.
Yes, and then...
Although I do appreciate the tension of that scene because they do show the thunder of the hooves. It's like, if you get knocked off these horses, you're going to die.
they do the sound mixing for this is particularly good when they did that. And Zoran, realizing that Bond is catching up, decides to use the steroids to his advantage, and it's hidden in the tip of his cane, which is something that Tibbett had actually speculated about. So he hits the cane, and it knocks Bond's horse, and it starts running off track into the woods, and they go in pursuit of him. And this is the part where I remember that I forgot that Bond told Tibbett to go take to go get the message about what Zoran's been doing with his how he's been cheating and that he's hoarding these microchips. And when Tibbett had told him, what am I supposed to tell him? Because he just finished washing the car, and Bond's like, oh, just tell him you go to town to get the car washed because you have to check out with the security at the gate. And that's when Tibbett just splashed the muddy water on it. And it's funny because when he drives up to the gate, Mayday was standing there, and he said, and she's kind of looks at him, and he's like, oh, just going to town to get the car washed. And she just kind of walks away, and he's like, okay.
It vanishes.
Yeah, she vanishes. He gets out of the car, opens the gate, feels she's gone. She drives off, goes to the car wash, and it doesn't seem like he got his information out before then. He went to the car wash first, which is weird because is it really necessary to wash the car immediately? It's like the important thing is to get the information to where it needs to be. But instead, he goes to the car wash first, and we see that Jenny Flex and the other woman, Asian woman, I'm sorry, I don't know her name, but they're at the gas station.
Not Jenny Flex.
They're kind of watching, and as Tibbett's car is going through the automated car wash, Mayday creeps up behind him in the back seat and throttles him. So flash forward to Bond's on his horse. It's going crazy. They're running through the woods, and he comes upon Tibbett's car driving, and he rides up alongside. It's like, oh, Tibbett, we got to go. And he sees that Tibbett's in the back seat. Mayday's driving and pointing a gun at him. He gets off the horse. They come to a stop, and then Scarpine searches Bond before he can really check on Tibbett. And then Zoran gets off his horse, and he's like, you've lost 007. And Bond has a reaction. I'm like, oh, he didn't realize he knew who he was. And Bond's like, killing Tibbett was a mistake. And Zoran's like, really? I'm about to make the same mistake twice. And Bond's like, oh, no, MI6 will retaliate. They're like, well, if you're the best they have to offer, yeah, whatever. So they knock Bond unconscious, throw him in the back of the car, and then they decided they're just going to push Bond's Bentley with Tibbett and Bond in the back seat to the bottom of the lake because no one's going to check on them. They could just lie and say they left. So they do that, and Bond comes to, opens the door underwater, and he actually unscrews the latch on the tires to use the air from the tire to survive underwater, waiting.
Has there been a Mythbusters on this?
There probably was. I don't know, though. I know they did a Mythbusters on how you would open a car door when the car is sinking, and they say you should wait till the car is completely submerged, so that way you can open the door. But I don't know about this particular one of the air out of the tire.
It's more believable for me to have Bond break the glass, but if you want to have him open the door and show how strong he is, that's fine. And also it kind of establishes when he leaves the water pump pipe later. But the breathing out of the tire, I need to know if anyone who knows anything about this. I will Bing it myself, but if you wanted to Bing it for me, no, you don't have to, Kat. You don't do that. That's not your job.
I was just set
anyway.
So that's also something else I forgot. Zoran had the great line before they started the horse race when Bond asked, how's it riding? He's like, oh, I'm happiest in the saddle. Just a great line.
Do you remember did we already cover the name of the horse?
Inferno.
Boom, science.
Yes, so Zoran and Mayday walk off. Bond survives. We then cut. Zoran's back at the racetrack, and General Gogol arrives. And we learn that Zoran is indeed former KGB. And it's like, that's hence the Russian connection. And Zoran's upset, and he says, what was the deal with the break-in to the Siberian Research Center? And Gogol's like, oh, that was regrettable, but you didn't follow protocols. You didn't have permission before eliminating 007, and you're jeopardizing. And he cuts him off. He's like, he's jeopardizing mine. And Gogol's kind of incensed that he's been yelling at him like this. And one of Gogol's henchmen is like, oh, what would you be without us? A biological experiment, a physiological freak. And so Mayday that got Zoran angry. So Mayday picks the guy up. And then Jenny Flex and the other and Scarpine come in, and they got their guns drawn at them. And Dolph Lundgren, who is Grace Jones's boyfriend at the time, is Gogol's bodyguard, and he's got his gun out. And Gogol just calms the situation down. He's like, "Patient, control yourselves." And Zoran just kind of nods, and Mayday just throws this guy down on the ground. And Gogol says, well, know this, comrade. Nobody ever leaves the KGB. Because Gogol is particularly upset about Zoran's commercial endeavors.
Yes.
But apparently he was willing to put up with it. but apparently he was willing to put up with it as long as they were getting special microchips, which are EMP impervious, which
Sure.
strangely never come up again in the whole movie. Like that was the thing.
Oh,
which
it does.
the story.
It does come up at the end.
No, yeah, kind of at the end. Yeah, I guess that's true. So then we cut to San Francisco. Zoran is in his blimp. The blimp used in the 1984 Olympics actually had the welcome sign on the side of it. Now they're using it for Zoran Industries. They're flying outside of San Francisco Bay, and he's hosting a meeting of, this is like his version of the Spectre boardroom meeting, or the Goldfinger game lounge thing. And he's telling all these guys that, we run all the manufacturing centers for microchips, and soon we should be able to control the distribution and be at the top of the chain. But there is, however, one obstacle, and he throws a bunch of microchips out of a bucket onto the table, and then the table opens up to reveal a large diagram of Silicon Valley, and he says, 250,000 workers, and all of these facilities there for the top microchip research and manufacturing. The latter not really true, because even by 1984, when they made the movie, manufacturing of microchips had already been outsourced overseas. He does the whole thing where, like, Goldfinger was talking about the nature of gold, and so Zoran dips his hand in the sand, and he's like, silicone, better than common sand, doing the whole Goldfinger thing. It's like, okay.
Alchemists.
But when he tells us that
the beginning of time has been trying to change common base metals. This is the worst Walken impression I've ever done. Keep going.
Yeah, so he tells them that if we want to control the distribution and the manufacturing of all of this, then each of you are going to have to pay me $100 million. And they all balk at this. But one guy in particular stands up and he's like, plus half of our net income? And he's like, well, and Zoran's like, maybe a little demonstration will convince you. He's like, these are outrageous terms. But rather than Zoran just simply saying, you're going to recoup your investment like 100 times, instead, he says, well, if a demonstration is not going to convince you, then, would you mind leaving? This is confidential going forward. And he's like, would you like me to? He's like, okay, sure. So
he's very gracious.
Yes, and he's like, Mayday will give you some drinks. He's like, okay. So they leave, and she walks down a hall, and she says, this way, and points him down the stairs. And Mayday is dressed kind of like a flight attendant, much more hip flight attendant kind of. And then as he's walking down the stairs, she presses a button, which opens a trap door over the sky, and he looks back, and she presses a second button, which turns the stairs into a ramp, a slick ramp. He slides out, falls thousands of feet to his death in San Francisco Bay. All right.
Well, he may have survived. No,
and then it cuts back to Zoran, and he's like, well, okay, that's great. Would anybody else like to drop out? And the blimp then sails into the bay, and Mayday gets into the cockpit. She looks out. She's like, wow, what a view. And Zoran's like, to a kill. And he smiles like he's smug that he said the title of the movie, or finished the title.
Yes.
Yes.
Insert Family Guy meme here.
Yes. So then as it's flying over San Francisco Bay, we cut down to Fisherman's Wharf.
Ahoy! You just said the magic word. You said Fisherman's Wharf, because we are at the scene, ladies and gentlemen. All of the people who are here, thank you for watching. I would like to say that we have a trivia question that could earn yourself a No Time to Die digital copy, iTunes only. And I think that, Kat, do you want to do it, or should I?
I'll do it.
Okay, great.
In this Fisherman's Wharf sequence, which Bond actress almost had a cameo in the scene, which ended up on the cutting room floor?
Almost had a
cameo. They filmed it, but it looks like she got cut from the final shot. And I've seen which shot it likely is, because you could see her boyfriend or husband of the time in the shot, but she's not. And you actually see him in a couple of the shots.
Which one is he?
Hmm?
Which one is he?
Another extra.
Okay.
I can't spoil anything else. I don't want to give anything away. So just monitor the comments.
Okay.
So we have.
So which former Bond actress had a cameo in the Fisherman's Wharf scene in A View to a Kill that got cut?
Yes.
All right.
So anyway, the Fisherman's Wharf scene begins with a bit of a montage as Bond is walking through the wharf along the dock and the pier. The fog is rolling in, as happens very frequently in San Francisco. It can be bright and sunny 1 minute, and then the next few minutes the fog rolls in. And it's like, oh wow, what happened? So Bond goes up to this one.
Hey, Kat.
What?
Can I see you at camera 2 for a second?
There's only 2 cameras. What's going on?
Nobody's watching. They're going to have to get this on the review.
What do you mean nobody's watching?
I mean, there are 0 people watching right now.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Did we advertise it?
Yeah. I tweeted and everything. Anyway, keep going.
All right. So they're walking through the wharf, and he goes up to this one seafood vendor, and there's a guy there played by David Yip playing Chuck Lee. And
I love David Yip, especially from Temple of Doom.
Yes. So he tells a couple code words, and he's like, I'm going to take a few minutes. And he gets off work, goes to talk to Bond, and we realize he's a CIA agent. And he talks about how great it is to be working with James Bond. So, again...
Well, I assume you would have heard from Felix.
Speaking of Felix, it was going to be Felix in the original script, but they wanted to bring in an Asian actor to talk for more of a San Francisco appeal.
James Bond diversity, come on. It's been happening since the 80s and the 70s and the 60s.
They could have called him Felix anyway. I mean, they've had, I don't know.
No, Bernie Casey in Never Say Never Again was a different, not the Eon universe.
I know it's not the Eon, but they would go on to cast Jeffrey Wright as Felix. So it's like, why not let David Yip be Felix? Yeah,
that's true, but I don't know.
Bond shows him these secret photos that Bond had taken on his Ring camera while he was in France, and he's like, "Oh man, you got a lot of interesting friends here." And he says, "Oh, this one guy here, Dr. Mortner, his name's actually Hans Glau, a Nazi war scientist who experimented on pregnant women in concentration camps." It's like, "Oh shit!" He's like, Bond's like, "What do you do?" And he says that he created psychopaths, and that Zoran, might be one of the psychos, as if we need this really weird connection. Same thing that we didn't really need the KGB connection with Zoran either, but it's like
it's this whole steroid babies that cause psychosis after what? I don't even know.
I know, it's very weird, and so he looks at the other. Yeah,
but it makes sense because it's Christopher Walken, so whatever.
And so Chuck Lee says that Zoran's got some oil wells along the bay. And there's not much information that he has, and Bond shows him the picture of Stacy, tells him about the $5 million ballers, and he's like, "Oh yeah, she's got some land over there, some oil wells. Zoran's been trying to buy everybody out along the bay, but the check he mentions is uncashed, or not deposit. So apparently they're monitoring her bank accounts as well, which is for a private.
All of the Stacy Suttons. It's like the Terminator going back to California, and he's just going through the phone book.
Yeah, so then Chuck decides to show him something else interesting. That a lot of the crab fishermen have been complaining ever since Zoran moved in with his oil wells. And so they go to talk to one fisherman in particular who says that, yeah, ever since he started up these oil pumps, they're gone. He's like, "Well, what do you mean they're gone?" He's like, "They didn't go nowhere. They just disappeared." And it's like, okay. And so Bond decides that, well, I better, investigate this a bit closer. So that night, Bond sneaks around near one of Zoran's oil wells in the bay. But we see that one of the Russian thugs, the guy who insulted Zoran at the racetrack, the KGB guy, is here in a wetsuit, and he has a partner, Polly Ivanova, and they're placing these explosive mines around, and and she's got a listening device, and she's listening in on the conversation that Zoran's having with Bob Conley, and they're testing the pressure of the pumps, and Bob is kind of concerned that Zoran keeps insisting that they push it up to the full power. And he's like, "Oh, I can't take it. It's newly tested." And Zoran's like, "Main strikes in 3 days. Any delays, and I hold you responsible." And he's like, "Okay." So he pumps it up higher, but he's like, "Something's coughing. There's something wrong." And so he's like, "Go investigate." So his thugs go to investigate and find the explosive. Mayday grabs the KGB agent. They bring him out onto the dock. Zoran walks out up there with Scarpine, and Scarpine gives him the mine, and then he gives the mine to the KGB guy. He's like, "I think this is yours. Defuse it." And so the agent reluctantly defuses it, and then Zoran's like, he kind of nods and points. And so then they grab this guy and throw him into the pump, and he gets just chopped up into pieces.
John Glenn loves chopping people up into pieces.
Yes, and then Bob Conley doesn't seem to know why the pumps are choking, which is because they're chopping up a KGB guy.
Right.
And Zoran says, "Go tell Bob to crank it back up. It should work now." And sure enough, it does.
Of course. No KGB agent.
Yes, Polly Ivanova, however, did manage to make a getaway over towards the marshes, and Bond is there, and her getaway is kind of sabotaged. He's like, "Come on, get in the car. We got to go," because they're being chased. And they take off, and they decide to go to this Japanese spa, like hotel spa.
Well, no, fight. Like he chases, they fight, and it's like, oh my god, I can't believe it's you. Okay, let's go. We should catch up again. And it makes complete sense that Barbara Bach was supposed to replay Anya. What's her name again? Smirnova. Agent Triple X, and that would have been really cool, especially as sort of like a denouement to the Roger Moore era.
Yes,
would have been lovely, but no, we get the third hot blonde.
I guess in this movie, you mean?
Yeah,
I guess. So they go to this Japanese hotel spa, and they're in the jacuzzi.
Fourth, if you count Jenny Flex.
Yeah, they're in the jacuzzi having a good time. Bond gets out and puts on this classical music, and they're flirting with each other. She's like, the bubbles tickle my, and then she's like, Tchaikovsky, and Bond goes into the back room, and they're gonna like sleep together or whatever. And right as the music is getting to its most dramatic beats, she goes over to the radio player and removes the tape, which is that she had made sure to take in there with her, the tape recording of what happened at the dock. And she sneaks away, and you see her silhouette as she's passing, and the big dramatic music's playing. Da, 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 da. And so she goes outside, and General Gogol was waiting there, and she gets in the car, and he kind of congratulates her as they drive off, and he puts the tape in there, and they play the tape, and it's just the music and the Japanese music, and they realize they've been duped. At which point it would have been smart for her to maybe just, turn the car around and just sidle back in and pretend that, try and play it cool. But no, she doesn't. They just leave. And that's the last time you see her in the movie. And it seems like she's only there for the sake of having some another romance scene, which we didn't really need. Bond, meanwhile, plays the actual tape, which he had switched when he was messing with the radio. And it is the dialogue from the docks, and he's hearing about the pumps and what Zorn's been doing. And he's trying to figure out what this is. So then he figures it's time to go. Not to Chuck Lee, surprisingly. It would have made more sense to go to Chuck at this particular moment, but instead he decides to go visit Stacey Sutton in Oakland. The house they used is the Dunsair Helmet Estate in Oakland. It's like a 50-acre property, old house built 1899, now in the NRHP. He goes there, and Stacey is sort of ambushed by Zorn's goons, and Bond shows up, and he tries to save her. There's a very awkward fight. She has a rifle loaded with rock salt because she doesn't want to kill anybody. There's a comical moment, or one that thinks it's being funny, where Bond almost knocks over this big vase, and he hands it to her, and he's like, "Here, hold this for me." And then she eventually figures, hell, and she smashes it over one of the guy's heads. And eventually they all take off, and she's like, "Oh, who are you, and what are you doing here? I thought you were one of his goons." And she says,
"Stop."
He says, "No, I'm a reporter. I'm with the London Financial Times or whatever." And she's like, "Okay, well, what do you want?" And and he's like, "Well, contrary, what are these goons doing here?" She's like, "The Zorn. He's wanted me to sell my grandfather's land with the oil wells forever. He's been bullying me into doing it, and he offered me $5 million." And she invites him to dinner to thank him for, saving her. And at the dinner, the homemade dinner, she tears up the $5 million check, and Bond is really surprised by that. Because
by the way, Bond can make quiche.
Yeah,
and technically he did not make a quiche. A quiche has no crust. A frittata has a crust. I, as a person who has served a frittata, would like to call out James Bond as making a poor quiche.
Yeah, so it's never, a reason is never given as to why she didn't want to sell the land to begin with, because it's not like he started harassing her until she said no. Wasn't it something like it was the entire reason, like the empire that her father built, and then there was some sort of there was business shenanigans that pushed her father's namesake, which she was running at the time, and she was a geologist, and she knew that he was up to something fishy, and it was also infringing on her. And so she wants to protect her father's business no matter what. She'll live in a tent. Right, but that still doesn't really track. It's like, okay.
No, I know it doesn't track. I'm just explaining the plot of the movie.
Right, but that's what I said. It doesn't really track that she won't sell the land.
I'm trying to find the emotional core.
Yeah, she's very cheesy and I'll never sell. Like, it feels like original Disney Channel original movie stuff. But okay.
I wish we could have got the chick from Dallas to play this role. It would have been more believable.
And one of the things Bond also did is that he had gone to Mr. Howe's office, also posing as the Financial Times, and asked him because Mr. Howe is the city comptroller there and at City Hall, and he asks him, why is Zoran pumping seawater into the wells? Isn't that dangerous? He's like, oh no, it's a way that we test out the integrity of the pipes and it cleans them out. It's perfectly safe.
Right. And that's like, this is a weird thing, because when I was watching the flick, I was like, well, Bond is clearly playing dumb, because Bond never says, I did not know that.
Yeah.
He never says that. But in that scene, when it's like, why would you pump seawater through your oil line? And he's like, for this reason. And Bond's like, enlightening. It's like, no. That is not a thing. They only do that to bolster Stacy or Christmas,
Right. So
Jones.
he goes back to, that's when he had decided to go meet Tracy or Stacy, and
don't mix those up. Those are important names. Don't mix those up.
So he invites Chuck Lee over to the house, and he's like, oh, he's with the or actually not, he doesn't invite him over first. What they do first is they both decide to go see to Mr. Howe at this point, and she gets fired. And he's like, and she's upset. She can't believe it. And he's like, oh, he fired me. And he's like, oh, don't worry. And he takes her back to the house and arranges for Chuck Lee to meet. And Chuck's like, and Bond's trying to find out, well, what's Zoran doing here? And she says that, pumping oil in is dangerous because it can cause earthquakes. And her animals are even responding to the earth tremors around there, as she calls them. And Bond speculates, well, could these earthquakes potentially from Zoran's wells affect Silicon Valley? And Stacy's like, well, no, it's way too far south of where these wells are. Can't do it. And Bond's like, well, what if he had a lot more wells? What is the, how many of them are there? Do we know? And she's like, well, the answer to where they all are or whatever is at City Hall. We can go there. And Chuck's like, okay, I'll forward this information to the CIA. And like, okay, great. Chuck leaves and goes and gets in his car. And then out of the blue, Mayday shows up again and just strangles him. And it's like, at this point, why doesn't Mayday just go into the house and kill Bond and Tracy, or Tracy, I keep saying Tracy, kill Bond and Stacy and just be done with it? I don't really know why not. But she strangles Chuck, drives off in his car. Bond and Stacy go out to get in his car to go to City Hall again, and they see what they think is Chuck driving away. So they think, oh, it's fine. So they go to City Hall, and Mayday, of course, has tipped off Zoran. So Zoran and Scarpine and Jenny Flex and her other ally bandit, whatever you want to call her, shows up. Bond and Stacy are in the records office, and they're digging around with flashlights trying to find information on the wells. And Zoran comes in and holds them at gunpoint, and she tries to reason with him, and Bond's like, don't bother with him, Stacy. He's a psychopath. And Zoran kind of scoffs at this. He's like, what, you two have joined forces? And he marches them into Mr. Howe's office. And Mr. Howe is completely taken aback by this. And he's like, what have they done? And Zoran's like, well, you need to call the police and tell them there's been a robbery. And, first they discharged her. Then they, came here to kill you and then cleaned up the body and left. But then they sadly perished in the flames. And he makes a point of swapping his gun for Bond's, which they've taken when they frisked him. And Mr. Howe's like, well, killed me and perished in the flames, but that means I would have to be. And Zoran's like, dead. And he shoots him dead right there. And then he laughs. Stacy screams. And Zoran kind of looks to Bond. He's like, oh, that's kind of neat, isn't it? And Bond's like, oh, enlightening and thrilling and chaining, And it's this, it's great. And it's just how psychotic this guy is.
Yeah.
And then Jenny Flex and her friend come in there and start spreading petrol around the place. Zoran and Mayday then march Stacy and Bond into the elevator. They press the button number 1 and they start going down, and then Scarpine severs the elevator line when they're between floors 2 and 3. At which point Zoran gets a bottle of Bacardi, it turns it into a Molotov cocktail and sets fire to the office and the elevator shaft. He's like, come on, let's go. So they flee.
Like, I'm not advocating anything, but from what I understand, Bacardi 151 is your ideal Molotov cocktail.
All right. So
that's what I heard.
As the fire is going, Bond decides, well, we got to get out of here. So he breaks open the roof of the elevator, and he's going to climb up to the doors and try and pry them open. And rather than just telling Stacy what his plan is, he doesn't tell her anything. He just keeps on going, prompting her to scream, James, 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 the whole time. And it's just getting really grating on the ears. He eventually gets the elevator doors open and steps out, and they close. She keeps screaming. He then uses like an ashtray garbage can to hold open the elevator doors. He then goes to get the emergency fire hose, which is on the level there, and throws it down to pull her up, and she's screaming the whole time, don't leave me, don't leave me. The fire's taking
She
off.
only does it twice.
A few times, more than that.
All right.
Outside, there's a whole crowd gathering. The fire trucks and the police are there. And then Bond suddenly has this big, silly, cheesy, heroic moment where he's carrying Stacy on his back and is going down the fire truck ladder. And he actually misses a step once, and everybody gasps. And this homeless guy drops his alcohol, his Jägermeister, and eventually gets down to the ground. Everybody's congratulating him. And then this cop walks up to him. He's like, "Hey, who are you? Is this your? Who are you?" He's like, "Yes, I am. Is this your gun?" "Yes." "Okay, you're under arrest." And he's like, well, "What's going on?" He's like, "Oh, we found, Mr. Houseman shot." And Bond's like, "Look, I need to tell you the truth. I'm actually a British secret agent." And Stacy's like, "What are you?" And he's like, and the cop's like, "Is he?" She's like, "Are you?" And he's like, "Yes, actually, it's true." And he's like, "Yeah, well, I'm Dick Tracy, and you're still under arrest." And then Bond,
amazing, best line. Love this character. I love this sort of. I don't know. I when I saw him initially, I was like, "This is Carmine from Die Hard 2." This is what happened before he transferred to the Dulles International Airport. Moving on.
Yeah. So once again, I mean, this whole segment of the movie makes no sense anyway. Because, like I said, while you were gone, once Mayday killed Chuck, she could have just gone in the house and killed Bond and Stacy and been done with it. Likewise, there's no reason to burn down the entire city hall unless I guess if he was worried about certain files being there, he could have just stolen the files. But now he's gonna burn the whole place. But okay, because he's a psychopath.
No, but there is something they do keep building on the psychopathic tendency of Max Zorin in terms of he doesn't care about anyone. And this does culminate in a character sort of realization and transformation. We'll get there when we get there. But this is something about the evolution. And even as Zorin is kills Hal, burns everything down, has this whole plan. He's like, "Do you have any idea how much of a genius I am? This is insane. This is great." Like it is. Walken is doing such a good job at being a charismatic, insane. Like he's not genetically engineered to be a super person. Like he's not lifting things, but right. He's working all the angles. He's got so much going on the inside. Like seeing.
He says that intuitive innovation is the sign of genius.
True side of a genius.
True side of a genius. And it's like, okay, so he's really narcissistic. And this is where the scene, again, at the fire truck gets bizarre. Rather than just letting the cop arrest him, which would have been logical, as happens in Casino Royale when Bond gets arrested at the airport, and sorting that out immediately and giving them the information they know about Zorin, he instead decides to open the emergency water hatch on the fire truck, blasting the cop out of the way. They steal the fire truck, but they didn't lock down the ladder, takes off into the city.
Let Stacy drive.
He lets Stacy drive. Bond gets out of the fire truck to go lock the ladder, and it doesn't work because. At
which point we rip off, or Terminator 2 or Terminator 3 rips off this scene.
Yes, except Terminator 3 does it better. This scene is just again the logic of it isn't there. It's a ridiculous chase. He's dangling off the side of the ladder. It rips off somebody's motor camper with who I'm making love, and Tracy repeatedly is like, "Oh,
bunch of hicks in the back of a pickup."
Stacy keeps going, "Oh, James," again, grating. And there comes a point where that cop who we really like is actually doing a good job chasing it, and he steers them to the Lefty Oguli Bridge, which is like a drawbridge there in China Basin. And he's like, "Okay, we got him now," and he orders this guy to raise the bridge, and he does. But Bond in the fire truck makes the jump at the last second. They jump over, lands.
It's good enough.
It's good enough. You can tell this isn't like the stunt from Man with the Golden Gun, and they didn't really get.
No. But what I mean is that, like, when let's call him Gary, when Gary says, "I need you to raise the bridge," and then and so the guy who's running the bridge, he sort of stutters for a bit, and then he raises the bridge, and then the fire truck goes over. But it's one of those things where it's like a really vicious speed bump, but nothing more. But like the bridge is still going. Right. And the cops don't show up until, like, I don't know, let's say 40 seconds later.
Right. The cops don't show up till then. And by then the bridge is so high up that it's questionable why they even tried to drive up there. And then you have this little comical bit where the one of the cars gets stuck on the top of the bridge. Others are falling down and crashing into each other. And then finally, Gary, as we call him, shows up, and he's like, he turns to this one guy, "Oh, you just lost your position as sergeant. You can kiss that goodbye." And the officers are looking behind him as they see his own car completely crushed by the bridge. And he turns around and he sees that. He's like, "Oh, damn it." So then and this is the next inexplicable part.
Okay.
Yeah, more of them. Obviously, they know the serial number of the fire engine. The fire department knows that. And
True.
yet, just because they jumped over this bridge, inexplicably, the chase just ends. It's like they escaped. It's like, how are you going to escape with a giant fire truck barreling through the city? It's just, like you didn't have the cops go ahead when you were steering them to the bridge, hoping to close it, and you didn't have cops ready on the opposite side in the off chance that they beat you to it. Really?
There were no police on the other side of the bridge.
None, and they didn't have it called in advance. Nothing, and it's a huge gaping hole in the movie, and then a ridiculous amount of time passes until they end up back in at Zoran's mine. No.
Yeah, they take the fire truck to Zoran's mine, and then they get in.
But here's the thing. There had to be like 8 or 9 hours between them making that jump, escaping from the police, and showing up at the mine. It is not a 9-hour drive to Zoran's mine on the other side of the bay. And they haven't heard from Chuck Lee in a while because they don't know he's dead. But they didn't think to notify any other authorities. He didn't think to call MI6. He didn't think to tap him with the CIA saying, hey, what's going on? Nothing for 9 hours. Like, what the hell are they doing for that long, you know? Especially since suspecting what might be going on. So they show up at Zoran's mine. They ditch the fire truck out. They ditch the fire truck outside on the service road, and they pull this. He turns on the siren, and one of the utility trucks pulling up, or the transportation trucks, is like, where's the fire? Bond's like, on your rear end. And the guy gets out of the truck, runs around, and he gets punched in the face. And Stacy and Bond take the guy out, and they get in the car, and they drive all the stuff, which turns out to be dynamite and other explosives. Drive it to the staging area at the mine. They get out, and one of the employee leaders there, he looks at the guy, and he's like, he sees that Stacy's wearing high heels. And Bond's like, oh, yeah, high heel. They're taking over the Teamsters.
Women's lib, yes.
Yes. And so Bond and Stacy go into this side room. They get their equipment on. They get their hard hats handed to them at one point because they were driving in without it, and it was trying to be tense as if they're going to get detained. So then they decide to sneak into the mine by climbing in the back of one of the carts because they can't afford to be seen by Jenny Flex and her friends and Zoran and Mayday, who are in the mine. So they get driven. They're hiding on the cart, and they're sitting on all the explosives, and Stacy makes a comment about it. And you get into this huge cavern, a great set that they built at Pinewood. And there's like there's a construction house in there, and all the construction workers are building the rails, all this kind of stuff, chiseling through the rock. And there's one particular hole in this cavern where in the hole they take this giant bomb that was hidden under some tarp, load it onto this catch that Bob Connolly stands on top of it. They lower it into this small hole, and it opens up into this huge cavern where you have hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of bags of dynamite and gunpowder and all that. Yep. And they place this bomb down at the center of it, and they come back up. It's not clear to me if all the employees are aware of what's going on, because they did, after all, keep it covered. They didn't want people to see that they were taking in this giant bomb.
Well, what do you think to yourself when you work at a place that has like dump trucks of dynamite being brought in every day, and it's like, I wonder what they're going to blow up?
That's the thing. It's like they're bringing in all these dump trucks of explosives, yet they're trying to hide the main bomb as if to say that these other workers aren't aware of what's going on. Even though the entrance to that main cavern is small, they would obviously know there's a huge cavern there. So it's just...
Well, and meanwhile, we're shooting to, like, we are seeing conversations of the employees being like, it's leaking under here. There's a lot of water coming in here. This is bad for a mine.
Right, and the Scarpine, as we see, is sneaking around here, is placing explosives in the mine at various points and trying to be very discreet about it. Bond and Stacy, meanwhile, duck into the construction house, and he's got this big high-tech model there, like a simulator model. I guess it's there to test, obviously test how much seismic activity he would need to achieve what he wants to achieve with all the oil wells. And she figures out that, oh, he'll kill millions, and what they're going to do is that by flooding the fault lines, or pumping in all this seawater, flooding all the fault lines, which they're going to do with the help of some of the explosives under these lakes, as well as the massive explosion right on the fault line. It's going to cause Hayward and San Andreas Fault to go simultaneously at the highest point of seismic activity of the high tide of the year that very morning in less than an hour, causing a massive earthquake, which will bring in a massive way, basically sink Silicon Valley and destroy everything from San Francisco to Silicon Valley. The entire East West Bay will be gone. And she's like, "Oh my God, he'll kill millions." And I'm thinking, okay, yeah, why not? And I'm thinking about this, and it's like the timeline of this movie seems to be like maybe over a week. And if he's only like a week away from main strike, then why was he so worried at trying to get Stacy's Stacy's land? It's like you're kind of out of time at this point. Yeah, you can make the argument that, well, he'd rather need it and not have it than have it and not need it. But it's like, dude, you're really getting down to the wire. It's a bit late for trying to get her oil wells to do anything sufficient. So that was a little weird. But anyway, Bond sees what's going on, and then Zoran and his gang decide to come into the house into the shed for whatever reason and see the door's locked. So Zoran starts hearing the Bond picks up a stool and throws it out the window to break in, and then that's when Zoran starts shooting the door lock off, points his hand to the gun inside the lock, and Bond just throws like a big axe at him, hitting his hand, prompting Zoran to just kick the door in, and Stacy is pushed out the window, and she falls onto a lower gravel pit, and she's like, ah! And then Bond jumps out as well. And
that is the best Tanya Roberts impression I have ever heard.
Yes, and so Bond and Stacy take off running into the mine, and Zoran takes another couple pot shots, and he has Mayday and Jenny Flex.
And not Jenny Flex.
And not Jenny Flex go after them, and he turns to Connolly. He's like, hey, get him back to work. And Connolly's like, what are you guys all looking at? Back to work. And we
only tried to murder someone. You never seen that before.
So Bond and Stacy are running through the mines, and they come to this little fork in the road, and they're trying to figure out where to go, and they get out the light a match to figure out where the map is, and they instead decide to knock down these sort of support beams to go through this side tunnel. They start climbing out one of the open wells, and Mayday shows up, or Mayday's running down there along with Jenny, and they decide to split up. Like Jenny and not Jenny are going to go down one tunnel, Mayday goes down another. Meanwhile, Zoran is standing next to Bob Conley and Scarpine, and he gets out the detonator. And Bob's like, wait, what are you doing? But Mayday and my men. And Zoran's like, yeah. And Bob's like,
a brilliant coincidence.
Yes. And Bob's like, Mr. Zoran, those men are loyal to you. And then Scarpine just hits him on the back of the head. And then Zoran just
pushes him over a cliff. And then all of a sudden, 2 Uzis show up with extra clips.
Well, not just yet. Well, first happens.
Okay. All right. Sorry. I got ahead of myself. I enjoy this.
The detonator. The explosions go off, the lakes start getting drained, and there was this one gag that was going on with a fisherman in one of the lakes, and how all the water is drained from the lake, and he's sitting on the bottom, there's no fish, there's nothing. He's like, oh, what happened? All the miners are getting killed and drowned. Jenny Flex and not Jenny Flex are killed in the drownings. Mayday manages to get to the well hole where Bond and Stacy are. She starts climbing up there and trying to grab at him. Stacy manages to escape, but she and Bond, Mayday and Bond, fall back down into the water. They manage to drive onto the cables. Meanwhile, Scarpine and Zoran get out these Uzis, and Zoran's like, do you have the extra magazine clip? Like, it's such a casual thing. And then he just starts mowing all these employees down, all the miners.
And maniacally laughing.
Maniacally laughing, enjoying every minute of it. He even shoots some of the electrical cables to collapse them into the water to electrocute some of them. And he's shooting fools left, right, and center and laughing hysterically. And Roger Moore didn't like this. He thought it was a bit tasteless and not really in line with the Bond film, even though Bond villains.
To be fair, I thought this was awesome.
I did too. It's awesome. Like you said, it's rising psychopathy in him. He just is that much of a crazy bastard, and very much part of the reason why I think Zoran is an excellent villain, despite that the movie isn't that good. And he's blasting fools around. And then at one point, Bond and Mayday are hanging on, and she's like, "Oh, I thought that creep loved me." And he's like, Bond's like, "You're not the only one he betrayed." And as they're moving through the tunnel, they see Jenny's body and not Jenny's floating. He's like, "Oh, Jenny, oh!" And it's like, I get why Bond isn't making the obvious quip that, lady, chill, you were a psychopath about ready to massacre millions of people, but he can't afford to do that because she's vulnerable and potentially willing to help him in this instance.
Well, let's be fair. This guy befriended Jaws.
That's true. So after Zoran and Scarpine have killed everybody, they get into the one of the mine carts, and Zoran checks his watch. He's like, "Good, right on schedule." They start riding out of the mine on the cart, and when they get outside, they look around, and Zoran and Scarpine takes off their mining hats, and they're like, "Ah, away!" And they go over to this what looks like a little salesman, mobile trailer, like the construction headquarters or whatever. And they press a button, and then the ceiling rips open, and the blimp starts inflating, the Zoran blimp. In reality, this would take 24 hours. It happens in the space of 2 minutes. So that's a little ridiculous. So the blimp takes off.
I see Moonraker. Ridiculous is off my radar.
so they're flying the blimp over over the mountain and going over Silicon Valley, and he has another view, and he's like, there it is, Carl, Silicon Valley, the greatest cataclysm in history. And
This
Carl's
is
like,
weird.
and Carl's like, attributed to natural causes. And then Zoran, big smile on his face, like, yeah, that's right. And I'm thinking, your plan is to destroy Silicon Valley and all of this, and you're going to fly over with a blimp with your name on it. And you've just killed all your employees who are all wearing outfits with your company logo on it. Their bodies are littered with bullets, and you're hoping that the destruction is going to be sufficient enough that it'll be devastating, that's the last thing they're going to find. Okay, kind of, but you still have the logo plastered on like everything. So it's like,
Is this kind of a Lex Luthor plan?
It is borrowed from Superman, but albeit for better reasons than the Superman movie, where Lex Luthor wanted to cause a massive earthquake to collapse California so all of his cheap land on the Nevada border would become beachfront property to make billions. Whereas this is actually a guy taking out all of the microchips, as I mentioned, the manufacturing centers had largely been outsourced to other countries by 1984, but I guess he figures by taking out the head of where all of the research and development happens and the top of the headquarters that he could potentially buy out the overseas manufacturing centers, monopolizing his brand, as well as then unleashing his surplus of chips on the market at will to not only make money, but use that to have, a power that he could yield over others. So, okay.
Right. But again, it's sort of one of those situations where I think it's the rising psychopathy that
exactly.
he doesn't give a he doesn't give a shit. He just wants to kill all of these people and make his mark in the world by drowning Silicon Valley. I don't think he even cares about the money anymore.
No, it's not about the money. It's about the power and the ego and the narcissism. Because again, he doesn't need to cheat
and the murder.
Yeah, and he doesn't need to cheat at horse racing, and he does it anyway because he's like Goldfinger. He's just that petty, and he's a psychopath, like Nazi psychopath apparently. So anyway, Bond and Mayday managed to make their way back to the main entrance to the mine, and they realize that they need to get the bomb out of there. So they get the main grapple hook, and Bond goes to Mayday decides to lower Bond down. Initially, he was going to do it. She's like, "No, you do. I'm stronger." So she lowers him down there. He hooks it up with the grappling hook and hooks it up onto the whatever this weird raising catch device is, and then Mayday starts.
It's called a hoist.
So Mayday starts cranking it. We see how strong she really is, just reeling this thing up. She raises the bomb. Yeah, she raises the bomb all the way, puts it on the cart, and they set the trip and set the cart to go out of the mine, but the handbrake slips and it won't hold. And Bond wants to try. Oh, we'll try pushing it out. And she knows it's not going to work. So he just jumps on the thing and holds the brake to make sure it doesn't slip again. And Bond keeps chasing after her, keeps telling her to jump it. She's like, "Get Zoran for me!" and it keeps riding away. And just as Zoran's blimp circles back around to the entrance of the mine, and he's checking his watch, wondering what's going on, and he sees Mayday coming out of the tunnel, standing on top of the bomb. He's like, "Mayday!" And then she looks up laughing hysterically, but then she sees Zoran and gets really solemn and angry.
No. She is not laughing hysterically. She is looking her own mortality in the face, and she is terrified. And then it is not until that she sees the blimp of Zoran that she looks at it with fiery eyes and is like, "You know what?"
Yep. And then
boom!
Yes. And she is dead. The bomb's gone. He's missed his chance. And he's just like,
it's all over.
Can't believe it. Wearing his gold aviator glasses. He can't believe what's going on. Stacy comes back around over the hillside, and Zoran decides to swoop in and get her. And inexplicably, she doesn't hear this blimp coming in. And Bond yells at her several times, telling Stacy to duck, and she doesn't. And Zoran opens the door and reaches down and grabs her and pulls her in, because I guess he wants to torture himself more by being annoyed by her. And so,
he just needed a passenger for ballast.
Yes, and so speaking of ballast, Bond jumps onto one of the tow ropes, and Scarpine notices that there's drag on the line. And so he pulls the blimp over the hill, and they start heading into San Francisco proper. And at first they try and get Bond to fall off by deliberately running the mooring rope over the antennas on top of the buildings. And that cop that we mentioned, Gary, as we call him, looks up and he sees this going on. Like, what the hell is this? And they start heading
he busts another cop car.
Yes, he busts another cop car. And they start heading towards the Golden Gate Bridge. And Zoran's like, this will hurt him more than me. And even Carl Mortner's getting kind of concerned. Like, he's even thinking that this, which is very weird, because in the previous scene, Mortner had the evil grin on his face because they're about to destroy Silicon Valley along with San Francisco and all of that. But now the thought of ramming the mooring rope into the bridge to kill Bond is somehow troublesome or bothersome to Mortner, which is really weird. And so he keeps sure enough, they do smack Bond into the bridge, and Zoran looks down and is like, goodbye. But Bond grabs onto the bridge. He grabbing onto the main suspension cable. He ties the mooring ropes around it, tying it tightly. I don't know if you want to
tie that nautical note, or not a sheep shank, if you will.
So the blimp is anchored to the bridge, and it causes them to jolt really hard. And Zoran's like, tells Scorpion, more power. He's like, well, more power, more power, more, do it, full throttle. And they arrange
and it wasn't until The Last Jedi that anyone encapsulated this performance, much like Kylo Ren or Adam Driver. I think I saw when it was like, more.
Yes,
I was like,
power. And so
this is Kylo Ren.
Yeah, so he's screaming at him to do it, and it's not helping. So then once they all kind of tumble in the blimp, Stacy gets up
screaming at him, and it does not help.
Screaming at him and starts hitting him. And she's like, stop it. And Scorpion throws her back onto he smacks her, and she collapses on the ground of the blimp. And Stacy takes the opportunity to run out the door, which has been smashed from hitting the bridge, and heading down to unite with Bond on the suspension cable. And Zoran's just disheveled, and he looks to Scorpion, and he's like, go get him. And Scorpion's like, go
out there,
exactly. It's like, go. So Scorpion is going to do that, but then Stacy picks up the fire extinguisher and smacks Scorpion unconscious. And Zoran gets really angry at this point. He unbuckles his seatbelt. She runs outside. Zoran grabs the fire axe, and he steps out onto the bridge. And Bond yells like, Stacy, jump! And so she jumps, tumbles down the suspension cable, but manages to hang on. And she's like, she manages to hang on in a sufficient spot. And this is the science fiction part I was alluding to earlier.
Yes.
We are meant to believe that Zoran was able to best Mayday, Grace Jones, in the dojo, a flat dojo on a horizontal plane. But when he has an axe facing older Bond with the benefit of gravity, since he has the high ground on the slope, inexplicably he is going to lose this fight. And so they did film some with actual stunt guys on the real bridge briefly on October 7th.
And they do incorporate some of those shots, and I was impressed that they were up there.
Awesome. And I think that these are the best San Francisco shots in the movie, because again, the other ones just looked a little flat, muted as far as color. This one's really shining and popping. They did build a replica portion of the bridge at Pinewood on the back lot for Chris and Roger. But this is a great fight scene, one of my favorites. It goes back and forth for a bit, and Carl is trying to come to and get up because he's also fallen behind on the blimp, and he's climbing up towards the door to see what's going on. And at one point,
Carl's old.
Yes, at one point, Zoran has Bond pinned to the suspension cable, and he's trying to almost like throttle him with the axe. And he's like laughing, and Bond just kind of elbows him and knocks him over. And Zoran swings a couple times, and he's losing his footing. And Bond kicks him, and he falls off the side of the main suspension cable, holding on with the axe. Bond trying to pry the axe away from him. Zoran is now hanging on just to the cable, and he's reaching. He's like, and then you see Carl's looking out of the blimp. He's like, Max. And then he laughs to himself. Yes. Like he's aware of what's about to happen. And for some reason, he thinks it's funny, which is a little off brand for somebody who's as egotistical and narcissistic as he is.
No, here's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Again, with the heightening of his psychopathic behavior, when he realizes that the culmination of his I want to kill everyone comes down to him dying, I do find in Christopher Walken's performance of Max Zorin, I think that he actually is like, this is hilarious. Like I think that he's completely but I think it's completely self-aware. I think it is self-aware, but also he enjoys death so much that I wonder what this one's going to be like. Like there is something about that, and it is only in this performance. It may not be informed by the rest of the movie, but there is something about that, about being mourned while you're still alive. And as he is about to fall to his own doom, he's like, this is great.
Yeah, and it's a great shot when he finally loses his grip and he falls. Yeah. And that's the first time where he's like, oh, and he falls, he screams, and he dies, crashing into the water.
Well, maybe he lives.
Carl just has to look like, like he's kind of disappointed, like, he didn't make it.
No, Carl's mad. He's pissed.
No,
his son is dead.
No. At first, he's not. Like, when Zoran first falls off the bridge, Carl's just like, it's too bad. And it's not until he hits the water that Carl really gets angry and starts shooting a couple times at Bond and Stacy. Then he goes back into the back of the blimp and because of course they have sticks of dynamite on the blimp, and he lights it. And Scarpine,
strategically, it doesn't make any sense to throw dynamite.
No, and he walks over towards the doorway and he's going to throw the dynamite there because of course this is a great idea. And Bond picks up the fire axe and cuts the mooring rope. And since the full throttle is still engaged on the blimp, it kicks up, causes Carl to tumble back into the blimp. Scarpine comes to and sees the bomb and grabs it, tries to get it out of there. And Carl's like, nah. And then kaboom. A very tiny explosion for what would actually happen if you were blowing up a gas from a blimp. Because
not only that, but also in the safe there was a lot more dynamite.
Exactly. So not only should that have exploded, the massive explosion from the inflated balloon should have done a much more damage at the top of the bridge, potentially collapsed it, but it doesn't. And Bond and Stacy are fine, and he's like, "You were still there, Stacy, you there?" She's like, "You betcha," and he helps her up, and he's like, "Oh, there's never a cab when you want one."
Does she say "you betcha"?
Yes. And
oh my God!
Like, there's never a cab when you want one, and then they laugh. And then it cuts to back to
General
MI6
Gogol.
And General Gogol is there and he wants to order the Star of Lenin to Bond. And he mentions that the first time we're awarding it to a non-Soviet citizen. And he's like, the defense secretary is like, M is the one who says, I would have thought the Soviets would have been, would have celebrated if Silicon Valley had been destroyed. And Gogol's like, oh, on the contrary, where would the Soviet research be without it? And then something they would never say. And then they all just start laughing with each other, like, oh, it's a good laugh.
Shy.
And Gogol's like, oh, is Mr. Bond, Commander Bond here? I would like to thank him personally. And then it cuts to Moneypenny's office, and she's listening in. And M's like, oh, sadly, he's missing. We're still combing there, trying to find him. And Moneypenny is crying behind the desk.
And this is the last appearance. This is the last appearance of Lois Maxwell.
Yeah, she's been in 14 movies now, and they knew, and this would have been something easy to reshoot once Roger told them after finished filming that he wasn't coming back. Mm-hmm. But they thought it was good to let her final scene as Moneypenny in this franchise be her crying behind the desk, mourning Bond's potential death. And like I mentioned in the previous film, or 2 films ago, For Your Eyes Only, they brought in that younger girl who they're going to have replace her, but then she kind of lobbied for that not to happen, which is why it was just her and Octopussy and her here. But that was just a terrible way to end Moneypenny's role. So then we cut to Stacy's house. And Q is in his security van out front. Why he doesn't just go to the door and knock, I don't know. It's not like there's anybody to have to hide from. And maybe he just thinks it's a cool excuse to use his spy bot. And so he drives the spy bot into the bathroom. And M's like, what's the status? And he's like, 007 alive. And Bond and Stacy are kissing. And Bond sees the robot. So he grabs the towel and throws it over the robot, and Q's kind of like smiling to himself, and then they start kissing and making noises behind the shower, and then it cuts to the end credits,
which is Duran's A View to a Kill.
The thing of this movie is that it basically, Roger was way too old for the role, obviously.
Quite.
Max Zorin is one of my favorite villains in the series because Chris Walken is not doing the Chris Walken shtick. They lucked out by David Bowie and Sting saying no, because he was really good in this. I feel it would have been much better if they had Dalton in the lead, because you could tell that the whole story is watered down for Roger. Like the whole thing feels like a feature. It's like a feature-length episode of Murder, She Wrote with Angela Lansbury, and like the whole stuff with the horses and how everybody's going down, like the Scooby Gang, down to the racetrack to bet on the horses, and they're all dressed to the nines. It's like this feels too much like a British dinner theater or Murder She Wrote. It doesn't feel like James Bond. It doesn't.
This is
like
why it feels like a middle-aged movie.
Yeah,
this is middle-aged people love Murder She Wrote. Middle-aged people, old people love Matlock. This is the Matlock of James Bond movies.
It is, and it's a shame because you have such a great villain with that rising psychopathy, and Mayday is a brilliant henchwoman and with a nice turn at the end. But it's like it's wasted on the.
You drop Timothy Dalton in the middle of this movie. You drop Roger Moore as James Bond, or not Roger Moore. Sorry, Pierce Brosnan as James Bond in this movie, and I'm like, you know what, this could work. But you have Roger Moore, like he is absolutely parental. towards Stacy until he decides to shag her in a shower.
That's actually what prompted him to finally quit. One day, Tanya Roberts brought her mother to set,
I heard this.
Roger saw her and he's like, "Oh my God, I'm older than the lead actress's mother. It's like, I can't stop this." And he told Cubby, "This is my last one." And Cubby had already been trying to recast him for 3 movies. He just didn't have the courage to tell him, "Look, man, you're too old." And so they like.
Well, it doesn't help when the director is building the entire franchise around you.
Well, they could get around that easily if they just cast another actor and went back to the Bond formula. But
I suppose.
Yeah, so it's just it didn't really work. I like the stuff. Again, the rapport with Godfrey and Bond. I thought that was pretty good, even though it doesn't fit in this movie very well. Or I mean, I guess it fits in this movie well. It's just not like a Bondian type thing. It's the Goldfinger plot again. Not as much creative there. It's clear that they are borrowing a lot from Superman the movie, and as hard as it is,
Superman 2.
Superman 1.
No, Superman 2 on the Statue of Liberty.
That and Superman 1, the whole plot. But another thing, you're going to find this is very funny. As unrealistic and ridiculous as the plot is, it could have been even more out of this world. Richard Maybaum's idea was that Zorin would somehow manipulate Halley's Comet to crash into Silicon Valley to destroy it.
Oh, thank God.
Don't know. And Michael G. Wilson pumped the brakes on that. He's like, "No, we need this to be a more realistic film."
Well, yeah, and thank heavens for Michael G. Wilson.
Yes, and so thank heavens for that. So overall, I mean, I have a little bit of a soft spot for it because I do like watching Zorin. He is a delight, and one of my favorite top Bond villains. It's just the movie is a bit of a drag, and particularly the first 45 minutes with all the stuff at the horse stables. And as beautiful as this chateau is, even the way they film it is a bit muted. It doesn't seem to be popping as much as the chateau in Moonraker in terms of the color scheme and the daylight and all of that. It's just everything in this movie just looks very flat color-wise.
Okay.
I don't know why. It just seemed very, like, even Northern California, you go down to the Bay Area, some areas look absolutely gorgeous for the vistas, and here it just looked very flat and muted cinematography. I wasn't really a fan. You can't ever say too much good things about Grace Jones and Christopher Walken in this film. Even Patrick Beauchamp, the Belgian actor who played Scarpine, was pretty good, and Carl Morton was just, oh my God, he's hilarious. And he's just so cartoon. And again, there's no reason to have had Zorin be a former KGB agent. Given, like you mentioned, Gogol's anti-capitalist, why is he tolerating Zorin starting this whole company and doing all of this?
Because it was for disruption of the Western, hedonism. I don't know.
Yeah, but that's the thing. I think that would have been a more interesting plot rather than having Zorin go rogue and do this Goldfinger plot. It's just, and then the fact that, because the KGB stuff doesn't fit in very well. The Polly Ivanova is a very random bit, as if we don't have Bond romancing enough young women and we need him to do it again.
Well, but I think that specifically because it was written for Triple X, I think that was a thing that was supposed to harken back to the previous adventures and whatnot. So yeah. I give it a bit of a pass, and it also it does define. That's the only relationship in the movie that I do give a pass, is because Bond had a history with Tchaikovsky.
Yeah. And then the whole Nazi bit, like, why is that even in there? It's so weird. It's just okay. He's a Nazi. Well,
Nazis are still acceptable bad guys in 1985.
But another thing, Zorin's very
when are they not?
Doctors around, nobody recognizes him, and yet the CIA seem to have a whole file on this guy. Oh yeah, he's Hans Glau. He's a concentration camp, all this kind of thing. But nobody at the horse, nobody's aware of who he is or recognizes him in that world. It's like, oh yeah, he's here. So that's a little weird.
If I may interrupt for just 1 second.
Yeah.
We do have a guest.
We do. And then the whole plot hole of, again, the whole fire truck chase not needing to be there in the aftermath. And I don't know if it's an exaggeration to say that I think the fire truck chase is one of the weakest action scenes in the whole entire series. Because there's no reason for it to be there. I'm more interested in what Zorin is trying to do and how he plans to get away with it at this point than having another pointless action scene. And because of just how unrealistic it was. You're right. The cop that we called Gary is pretty entertaining.
Yeah, I like Gary.
Yeah, it's just so overall, it's not a good movie, but it has a great villain in Henchwoman. Would have been much better.
Do you have a level of Martini?
Oh God, I guess Grace Jones and Max Zorin got to count for, or Christopher Walken got to count for something. So I'll give it like a 3 Martinis out of 10.
Yeah, I'll give it a 3.
All right.
Yeah, 3. I can't. I want to love it more than I do. Just
Now, I admit I'm a bit, again, nostalgic and biased that I do revisit this movie more often than some of the others, but that's more of a nostalgia thing and just me loving Zoran, but it is a drag to get through a lot of what's in there. And again, the silliness and the ridiculousness of it.
Well, and also Uncle Bond.
Right. The whole uncle, how creepy that is more than in any of the other movies. I mean, I know we talked about that a bit in Diamonds Are Forever with Connery being a bit over the hill and stuff, but this is
But
really...
I still bought him as being sexually attractive and charming. Like,
Yeah,
I can understand how Tiffany Case and Bond hook up in Diamonds Are Forever.
Oh, totally,
but in this movie, it's just like, what are you guys doing?
Yeah.
Speaking of what are you guys doing?
So you guys are way more generous than me. This gets like a 2 martinis.
Oh, dude, have you seen Octopus?
I like that one better than this one.
Well, I accept your apology.
I gave Octopussy a 4. Again, these are ratings compared against other Bond movies, even though I do find Octopussy in general entertaining. Pretty entertaining movie, despite how ridiculous it is. And it's hard to believe that a movie that felt much more grounded in reality as this one could, in a sense, be even rivals the level of ridiculousness as Octopussy.
I'm just absolutely flabbergasted by how wrong I have been about Roger Moore.
Yeah.
So, Scotty, is anybody watching the show?
Currently 1. I think I'm that one.
This is a new low for us.
It'll be fine. It'll be fine. Don't worry about it. Just for everyone who's been watching, if you've made it this far, first things first, I've not been doing cocaine. I have a bit of a head cold, and so I'm sick. But I learned a long time ago that if you feel terrible, do a show talking about something that you love, and you'll feel better. And I do. I'm fugly, but I feel better. So I apologize if I have sniffled.
Bummer on the not doing cocaine part, but
I know, right? I'm poor.
Right?
So we therefore have nobody competing for the prize of the trivia prize tonight then.
Well, then perhaps we can push this off until next week when we do our James Bond recap and look to the future. I don't know who these people who are... Anyway, I'm talking about the chat, which I suppose I should.
Yes.
I don't know what this means. There are many people in the chat saying things that are not English.
Yeah, I think that's I think we're getting spammed. But
that's a shame. Don't click that link, everybody.
Okay, so next week we're not going to recap a movie. We're going to take a break and do a summary of... We're going to have a show, but we're just going to do a summary of where we are, where we've been, where we're going in the next year.
Yeah.
That way we can start a new actor in the new year.
Which actor is that, Kat?
Timothy Dalton.
We are going to start 2022 with Timothy Dalton in The Living Daylights. What day is that going to be?
That is going to be January 5th.
So January 5th, we are going to be doing The Living Daylights, and on January 13th, 12th, my birthday show.
Nice.
We are going to be reviewing the License to Kill.
Yes.
I am very much looking forward to that. And hopefully we'll have some special guests, but I think it's appropriate that we do new Bond, New Year. And next week we're just going to do we're going to do a recap and a look to the future. And if you'd like to win we're going to have to get a new trivia question, Kat.
Yeah, here's the thing. If nobody watched or participated during the live show, the trivia question, unless you tune in before we sign off in probably a couple minutes, the trivia question is no longer going to be valid for this movie this week.
I know. So anyway, the answer to the trivia question during the Fisherman Wharf scene was Maud Adams.
Yes, Maud Adams was in town, and she and her boyfriend were in a few of the shots, but she ended up getting cut out. There's one shot in particular where Bond is walking through this overhang in front of the shops, and you see the boyfriend all the way over on screen left, almost like talking. Obviously, you can't hear him with his voice or anything, but he's presumably talking to her, but she's just cropped out because of how they cut the shot. But you see him in the background in a couple other shots as well. So for the longest time, that was a long-standing myth that she was in the movie, and the reason it's like a myth is because no, she's not in the movie, but yes, she did record the scene. So,
Well, from what I understand, Maud Adams, and as you mentioned before in the recap and the review, and when we were talking about John Glenn and everything like that, the people who were making James Bond movies from the beginning, it was a very almost family affair. It was a production team. It was a production family. And so when someone was making a James Bond movie and you were in the area, you showed up, you hung out, you'd have a good time. So in the Fisherman's Wharf scene, Maud Adams and her husband, boyfriend at the time, they were hanging out. And yeah, she was supposed to be there.
Yep. So next week will be kind of like a freewheeling show, which will be kind of fun.
Oh my God. Is
Cool.
it going to be a James Bond free-for-all?
Pretty much.
Basically, we could do that too.
Well, heavens, mark your calendars, nobody. All the nobody. You're all people. Everyone who's watching this. I forget about the
Everybody's a
after
person.
show. I always forget about the after watch. Anyway.
All right.
Oh, heavens.
Do you guys want to run down some comments?
I would love to.
Oh yeah, there are some.
There are.
There are.
Canadian Spider-Man says, fantastic. Happy holidays, everyone. I love your hat, Spidey. Oh, and Canadian Spider-Man, I would love to hear your opinion on, No Way Home.
Michael says Duran for the win. Yes.
Is that what
That means
FTW means?
Yes.
Yeah, for the win.
Okay. I thought it was something different. Sherry, it is lovely to see you. Canadian Spider-Man says, Scotty R30, me. Great to see you and Catherine. Well, it's always great to see Catherine. I am an added bonus. Or I'm like when you go to a hotel room and you get a chocolate on a pillow, Catherine is the comfort. I'm the little treat on the pillow. Canadian Spider-Man says, the Fantasmagorium show, hail to everyone. And hail to everyone. Agreed.
Here's a nice PSA.
Take care of it, bud.
Canadian Spider-Man says, at Todd Michael. Sweet. I just learned the trick of holding the Alt button down, then passing your cursor over the person's name to have the delete option pop up. Thanks for the wrenching. Okay. So, yeah, that's
Well,
cool.
but I think I may have arbitrarily banned someone because I didn't understand what they were saying.
Oh, yeah? Well, maybe.
Yeah, no, I know. It's weird when you let me in control of the buttons. Todd Michael says, San Francisco is my favoriteest place in the world. Have you ever been to San Francisco, Catherine?
Several times. Not for like maybe 4 years.
Steve, have you ever been to San Francisco?
I've been through it. I haven't spent much time there. Although if things go in my favor here, I might be spending a lot of time in the area.
I've only been to San
Coming up.
Francisco once.
Well, San Mateo, which is close, kind of close.
Yeah.
Where's the airport? Is that in San Mateo?
No.
The most beautiful thing that I've seen in San Francisco is I was taking off from the San Francisco airport and I got to see the Golden Gate Bridge from Starfleet Academy and Alcatraz from the movie The Rock.
When I went to Hawaii, we left out of San Francisco. It was nice.
Nice. And also you got to Hawaii, so that's good.
That was also good.
Yeah. Canadian Spider-Man says, ha ha! San Francisco is one of the Bond places I haven't seen. Thus, I have no possessions. Possessions. I think he needed a different word there, but I understand what you're saying. Canadian Spider-Man says, I'd love to see it. Todd Michael, last name. And I will as soon as I am no longer a political prisoner in my own country.
Right.
Oh, Canada. Todd Michael says, it's no Saskatoon, though. It's true. We don't need bridges in Saskatoon. It's all flat. Todd Michael, still here, says, I wonder if Sting was allowed to take his winged metal bikini bottom from Dune. Of course he was. He's Sting. He gets to
Right.
keep all of his stuff. And Todd Michael says, speaking of the Canada,
My Team Jones won't see any play on the ice until February 10th against South Korea, and I am so excited.
are you talking about curling?
Curling?
So,
Probably.
Todd Michael says it's always the Soviets. Well, it's up to
always the
General
Soviets.
Gogol.
Snowboarding was extreme.
It was extreme. Did you? Oh my God, Steve, have you seen View to a Kill?
yeah.
And so remember when they play California Girls?
Not specifically. It's been several decades.
Fucking good for you,
2
man.
decades.
What a painful thing to revisit. Canadian Spider-Man says snowboarding is so much fun. 2 plankers can suck lemons.
Yeah.
Canadian Spider-Man says Saskatoon. Oh, I spent a day there once. LOL. Looked for a place to live and then decided.
Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada, right?
Can I tell a brief story about Saskatchewan?
Do you have to?
Yeah, I do. A friend of mine, when she told me that in Saskatoon you can watch your dog run away for 2 days, and then I said to her immediately, I said in Ontario we try and get the dog back.
Mm-hmm.
Todd Michael says I think the term juicy fruit is racist.
Maybe. And everything is racist. Hey, guess what?
Well, Todd Michael.
When everything is racist, nothing is racist.
Todd Michael, 2 things. The taste is going to move you.
It is.
And also, I believe Juicy Fruit is going to be a Chuck Tingle novel one day.
You said nobody was watching the show. Obviously, a lot of people are watching the show.
At the beginning, I don't know what happened.
Yeah.
Todd Michael says, Canadian Spider-Man says, South Koreans play ice hockey? Who knew? The South Koreans.
South Koreans, yeah.
They knew, and they're good at it. They got the best goalies.
I'm talking curling, baby.
Todd Michael says, ice hockey? Bah! Massive fan of Canadian women's curling for some reason, says Todd Michael. And by the way, if you'd like to go by my Patreon, I do have something set up, and it's been there since about 2017. But I do want to start a calendar called Girls Who Curl.
I'd buy that.
It's hot.
Yeah.
Todd Michael says, Kat knows a lot of shit about a lot of Bond stuff. And yeah, absolutes. Kat, it is a pleasure talking to you about this. Like, Steve and I have talked about this backstage in the past, and I'm sure I talked with you about this before. I had such a terrible day. I have a cold, work is terrible, but having this talk with you, like talking about A View to a Kill, which is not my favorite James Bond movie.
Yeah.
This builds me up. This is so great. And it's because of your knowledge and because of, hanging out. You're a great companion for conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Todd Michael says nobody from San Francisco would ever refer to the city as Frisco.
Yeah, see, that's why I thought that Connolly may have been referring to Frisco, Texas, because he says he's an oil man. But then you find out that no, he's actually, well, I mean, the mine was probably near San Jose, or San Andreas way down there. But I guess he was referring to San Francisco.
Yeah.
Todd Michael's right, though. Yeah.
Yeah. And last one.
And the captain is here. Ahoy, Captain. Captain Cockney number Spock says Scotty is Mr. Pink. I wish I could grow a goatee.
You Mr. Pink.
Why can't I be Mr. Black?
Wrong movie. Oh, well.
Mr. Black's on a different job.
Yeah.
You can't. Yeah. No, I know. You know what?
Because you're a faggot. That's why.
I didn't realize I didn't look like James Bond until you said that, Cap. Yes, I agree with you. I look like a Reservoir Dog. I deserve to be shot in the belly.
I was thinking you were wearing like Zorn's suit.
I don't even know what I was going for. I think this is so much more of a Dalton.
Is it?
Right.
I think so. I think so. I don't know what I'm doing. Either way, like, I can't wait to see The Living Daylights.
Yeah.
Like, I'm looking forward to a change in at least actor tone, because I know The Living Daylights still adheres to a lot of the tropes of the Moore era, but I am looking forward to a different actor energy.
It's weird. I stopped watching James Bond movies for a while because of Roger Moore I liked so much when I was a kid. And I was like, oh, he's not in them? Nah. And I kind of moved on. I went back and revisited, but
I don't know.
weird time.
I kind of feel...
So now, I guess this is since this is his last film, how do we feel about the Roger Moore era as a whole?
I think that the Roger Moore era of James Bond was of its time.
Yeah.
I think that it was reflective of a juggernaut of cinema through the 60s that was attempted, like, through the rough waters of On Her Majesty's Secret Service to try and continue on. We needed Roger Moore, or we needed Sean Connery back, and then there needed to be a reestablishment in terms of tone, culture of being British, and charm and suave, international. And they, like, Albert R. Broccoli famously said that the Saint will never be James Bond. And Remington Steele will never be James Bond.
Right.
It was an elevation of those actors from the characters. Roger Moore was the Saint, but he will be forever known as James Bond. And I think the same applies to Pierce Brosnan. I think that it is of its time, and I unfortunately think that the Roger Moore era did descend into parody. And that is why I am going to have to reassess my Roger Moore standing in terms of Bonds.
But to be fair, so much of 80s cinema did that, especially early 80s cinema.
Yeah,
right?
okay.
So
I
it kind
know.
of fits. It kind of fits, right?
I get what Connery meant when he was asked about it, I think in the late 80s or the 90s or sometime. He's like, yeah, the Roger movies were very parody. And he felt that way all the way through. And I can see why, because like we said, a lot of times it's Roger Moore being Roger Moore as opposed to James Bond being written around that. And as a kid, a little kid, I love the Roger Moore movies. They're so fun and silly.
Yeah.
Watching them now, it's just like some of them are kind of hard to get through. It's like, oh, man, you know?
Yeah.
And I could see what he meant. Even though, you know, the Connery movies have more cringe in terms of the interactions with the characters and stuff, whereas the Moore movies are more or less just a lot of really silly and ridiculous. But I loved also about Roger is that he was very open with the fans. He wasn't like a curmudgeon about it. He owned it. He loved it. He even went on fan podcasts. He was a great ambassador for that franchise.
Absolutely. And I don't want to take away from Roger Moore as a person or as an actor.
No,
like, I love many of his performances across many genres. But I think that Roger Moore was a parabola. Like, he started off as a cover artist. He did make it his own. But as he became the star of the franchise, I feel that the franchise itself suffered.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
then
you got anything else, guys?
No, not for this, but we'll see you next week with a free-for-all Bond. Maybe we can get some guests on. Who knows? We'll size up what we've done so far, what we intend to accomplish next year.
Maybe do a giveaway?
Shoot us some idea in the comments. Because at the current rate that we're going, we'll be finished with all the films and the unofficial films by March 2nd at this new schedule, right? So in that case, send us some ideas of other Bond things you want to see us talk about once we get around to March. Obviously, there's a lot of time for it, but next week's better than ever since we're going to be, freewheeling
it. Cap says Moore's best nemesis had to be Christopher Walken.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I disagree, Scaramanga. Scaramanga is still on the table, pal.
Yeah, you're right. No, you're
I
right.
respect you, Captain, but Scaramanga. Anyway,
about
yeah,
that.
no. Much like the end of A View to a Kill, there is no title as to which James Bond will return. But I can tell you, much like James Bond, Martinis and Gadgets and Guns will return. And so we will see you next time. For Kat and Steve, let's just keep the British end up. Thanks, Rob. See you, bud.